Chapter 19. Epicurus had to pay a little more than 4,000 silver coins for the war horses and new slaves. He couldn't afford the rest, so Keys, generously, let him use some spices to make up for it. Keys didn't fly back to the dragon's lair immediately. He was interested in the ogre warlock, who had discovered a unique spell-casting technique. There was no memory of such a spell-casting technique in the dragon's heritage. In the blue dragon's lair, it cost a lot for the younger dragons to learn spellcasting from the older dragons or even the lair lord, Sirota. After all, the blue dragon wasn't a selfless creature. Therefore, it was a rare opportunity for Keys to learn some new knowledge at a low cost. "Generous big fella, you're here to try Brew's delicacies again today, right?" The ogre gourmet, who was focused on dealing with the camel beast ribs on the barbecue grill in front of him, greeted Quess happily when he saw him walking over with food. Keys gave the spices he got from Epicurus to the three brothers for free. He gained a good reputation among the ogres for being generous and hospitable. Keys, who had transmigrated from the empire of gluttony, naturally didn't refuse to share his food. "Of course, I'm looking forward to your new roasted camel meat, Brew. The chili sauce from yesterday was really strong. I want to try it again." Keys passed the jujube wine that Epicurus gave to the ogre gourmet. Brew opened the barrel and tasted it. His eyes lit up and he passed the barrel to his two brothers. "Hey friend, this water is good. It has a precious sweetness." Brew licked his lips and looked expectantly at Neru, who was drinking heartily. He hoped that his brother would leave him a small mouthful so that he could savor the taste. "This isn't water, Brew. This is wine made from jujubes. It doesn't have much alcohol content. Of course, this sweet wine is very expensive." The witch doctor ogre Paru, who was well versed in plants, explained to his brother after taking a small bite. "The little ones are all cowardly and stingy. Only the big ones like us and the big ones are generous and brave." As expected, Nalu drank all the jujube in the wine barrel in one gulp. He raised the wine barrel with one hand as if he was holding a wine cup and greeted Keys, who said that ogres were straightforward bores. This big guy was obviously flattering him. Keys looked at Rue's sincere expression and thought that if he hadn't cooperated with his two brothers to kill the troublesome elven chanter, the blue dragon might have been fooled by him. "I know, Nalu. There's only one barrel left in this caravan. When we get back to the dragon's nest, I'll give you a few more barrels to satisfy your cravings." Keys transformed into his human form and stood between the three ogre brothers. He patted blacksmith Nalu's shoulder and said. The boorish ogre, who had obtained the desired result, could not help but pout at his brother, indicating that his little scheme had succeeded. "Mighty messenger of the dragon's nest, please forgive my brother's rudeness." Paru, who was the most mature among the three ogre brothers, nodded slightly to express his apology to Keys. "It's all right, witch doctor. Do you have any more vitality ointment? I want to experience the cooling sensation again." Other than the ogre gourmet's unique spellcasting ability, the ogre voodoo ointment provided by the ogre voodoo doctor also gave Quess a huge surprise. Apart from the disgusting color and appearance of the ointment, Quess felt that it was very familiar to him, whether it was from the smell or the cool and refreshing feeling after applying it. "So this is the cooling ointment." Kraith applied the ointment that the witch doctor passed to him. He recalled the ointment that he would often use when he was bitten by mosquitoes in the summer back in his hometown. Kraith couldn't help but recall some vague memories. "This ointment is amazing." The ogre witch doctor loved it when others praised the effects of his potions. It was the greatest compliment to his abilities. Apart from his brothers who could tolerate the appearance and smell of his potions, the other little people couldn't spontaneously like the potions he invented. Well, Big Guy Keys was an exception. Actually, Paru has another type of vitality ointment. Its effects are much better, and it even has some detoxification effects, the ogre gourmet said with his head lowered as he fiddled with the ribs. That's right. Na Lu chimed in excitedly. That's right. However, this potion needs to be consumed quickly. It can't be tasted carefully because. Seeing Keys looking at him, the ogre witch doctor took out a small water skin. The water skin was made from the fascia of an unknown animal. Holding it in his hand, a yellowish-brown liquid could be seen wriggling inside. With his talent, Keys didn't think it would be a problem. Without waiting for Paru to finish speaking, he opened the waterskin stopper and took a sip. Pff, bitter, bitter. Damn it, this is 10 times the strong flavor of Huaxiang Vital Energy. Attack the ugly, Huaxiang Vital Energy. This was a powerful potion that could cause a shift in alignment. Seeing Keys's pained expression, Bru, who was suppressing his pain with his head lowered, and Na Lu, who was looking forward to it, burst into laughter. Paru looked embarrassed. He wanted to say something but stopped himself. You can only drink a little at a time because the taste is too bitter. It's fine. Drink some of this to relieve your internal heat. It's said that Huaxiang Vital Energy goes well with roasted meat in this hot weather, Keys said sinisterly. Keys didn't care if the ogres could understand him. He wrapped one arm around Bru's neck and used the other hand to pour the potion into Bru's open mouth. Oh, let me go. Didn't you want to know about my spellcasting knowledge? It's all in the gourmet book. I'll lend you the book. The intelligent ogre, who always had his own ideas, used his wisdom to save himself. Bru was only forced to take a small sip before he was released. It was as if he had been reborn. However, the blacksmith, Ogre Neru, wasn't so lucky. Although it had monstrous strength, it was still stronger as a gifted young dragon. Oh, big guy. I can give you a few pieces of armor made by Neru. Or I can teach you how to forge. I was destined to carry bricks in my previous life. I won't learn how to forge in this life. Thud, thud, thud. The rest of the potion was poured into the Ogre Neru's mouth. Balu, this potion won't kill Neru, right? Bru whispered to Balu when he saw that his brother was on the brink of death after being poisoned. After receiving a negative answer, Bru and Keys laughed heartily at Neru's misfortune. After following the caravan for a few days, Keys studied Bru's Guide to Cooking Ogre Delicacies and slowly summarized the knowledge of ogre warlocks about their spellcasting. It's a rather novel spellcasting method, but it also has traces of the spellcasting habits of bloodline warlock. Unlike directly communicating with a mysterious source or using life force as an equivalent exchange to cast spells, the ogre's technique is to explore the properties of some materials to simulate the sensory state of the spellcasting process. He doesn't study the essence of things to determine the principles and then construct spell models like the wizard. Instead, he uses materials to stimulate himself and bring about synesthesia. He uses the superficial senses to directly see or experience the spell model. Then, he uses his mind to adjust the elements to stabilize the model and achieve the effect of spellcasting. For example, when an ogre uses Flame Blast, he first uses the taste of spicy to stimulate his synesthesia. Living creatures can't taste spicy. This taste is actually a compound feeling of burning and slight pain. It is through this experience that the ogre warlocks extract the unique sense of burning. This feeling is actually similar to the shaman witchcraft that uses fire as a sacrificial offering or self-sacrifice to obtain the perception of fire itself. Through the sensory stimulation of the spicy taste, the ogre warlocks can simulate the nature of the flames. Add to that the explosion caused by the sneezing of the air, and the combination of the two together. Finally, some warlocks have the innate ability to manipulate the elements and fill them in the sensory spell model, and the Flame Blast spell is formed. It's very similar to the shaman's ability to construct spells, but it has the skills of a warlock. Therefore, it's not wrong to call the ogre warlocks. This is a novel spellcasting method formed by experience and intuition. The ogre warlocks already have a few very good spells in the field of evoking. The use of simulacrum on the battlefield shows that this technique can still work in the field of illusion. But I wonder if the abilities of other spellcasting schools can be effectively simulated? If it can be simulated, what materials do I need to stimulate my senses? There's no need to memorize spells in advance, no need for spell structures, no need for incantations. If it weren't for the fact that there's no way to avoid the drawback of not being able to cast spells without materials, and there are too many spells that exist, there's the question of whether it can be simulated. This can indeed be called a new path of spellcasting. If the ancient civilization also had this spellcasting method, would it be possible to win against the annihilation civilization that has the power of spell prohibition? Keyes thought about this question for a moment. In the end, he rationally told himself that it was impossible. The Reaper civilization was able to force a powerful civilization that could compete with the Netheril civilization that was prosperous with arcane magic to use the Curse of Fate. The Annihilation Messenger's restrictions on spellcasting ability must be far beyond his imagination. In the end, this spellcasting ability still required the mobilization of element. Perhaps in their spell prohibition domain, whether there were any spellcasting elements was a problem. Of course, this didn't prevent him from learning a novel and interesting ability. As for the use of this ability, Keyes also had some ideas. He couldn't wait to imagine the stimulation that he could bring to other dragons when he used simulacrum to simulate the breath of other chromatic dragons and even metallic dragons. Of course, he probably couldn't simulate some special dragon breath. P.S. Spellcasting School, also known as Spellcasting School, Magic School, etc. It's the rule that spells are artificially divided into 8 major spellcasting schools and 1 universal school according to their effect. The 8 major spellcasting schools are defense, incantation, prophecy, enchantment, evoking, and illusion. A few spells, such as arcane mark, limited wish, permanency, prestidigitation, and wish, don't belong to any school and are called universal spells. Chapter 20. In addition to the novel knowledge obtained from the ogres, some strange potions, and the additional protection, fee from the merchant Epicurus, Keyes, who was following the caravan, had a new harvest just before they reached the core area controlled by the dragon's kin. Several elven captives who were released after the previous battle quickly brought back a reply from the chief of the Salem tribe regarding the ransom of his son. It was a group of 10 powerful elven warriors, led by an elven chanter, who escorted the elven captives to ransom their chief's beloved son. The elven chanter leading the team was called Brock, but those who knew him well in the tribe would call him by his nickname, the Tongue Taker. His figure was robust, and his muscles were bulging. When he walked, he was like an eagle looking at a wolf, and he was truly ferocious. There were elves who said that the blood of the green-skinned orcs flowed in his veins, but he challenged and defeated them one by one. According to the tribe's rules, the defeated elves had to take away something that belonged to them as the spoils of war for the victor. Brock's choice was always the same, the tongue of the rumormonger. The cold Brock, the cruel tongue-taker. Not only was he the tribe's most elite 10-pillar warriors, but he also needed to stick 10 spears with the heads of the enemy tribe's warriors at the entrance of the tent where he lived, as a human head pole to show his bravery. Brock was also a chanter who could control the unique sound spell of the desert elves. This required rare talent and decades of diligent practice. In addition, he also had to endure the strict requirement of not eating any spicy food for the rest of his life. Only such a strong person would be able to subdue an elite team composed entirely of the 10-pillar warriors. As Hajar Alto's friend since young, and as Hajar Khan's most trusted warrior commander, he clearly knew the dangerous situation that the tribe was facing now. Although the tribe's morale was high, and the warriors were busy sharpening their swords and spears. But the tug-of-war with the equally powerful Samhain tribe had already made the quartermasters in charge of logistics despair. The tribe's army could drain an oasis's water source in a week, and the newly born livestock would be used as rations by the army before they could be raised. The quartermasters were even studying whether they could use the captured enemies to solve the food problem. In addition, the human empire's eyes were always on the periphery of the tribe. They seemed to be plotting to eliminate the threat of the elf tribe once and for all. Within the elf tribe, the decadent elders took it as a form of glory to keep the chieftain in check. They greedily enjoyed the power given to them by the traditions of the elf tribe. Like a group of parasites, they slowly extinguished the vitality of the elf tribe. But the war could not stop. Only by defeating the Samhain tribe would the chief be qualified to be called the chief of the elven tribe. Only when Hadjar became the Khan of all the elven tribes could he unite the strength of all the desert warriors. Only with this force could they conquer the cities of the human empires. Only then could the desert elves enjoy more water sources and raise more livestock. Only by breaking the seal of the city could they break the iron chain tied around the desert tribes' throats by the cowardly and powerful people who knelt. Quess, who had transformed into a human teenager, looked at the Salem tribe messenger in front of him, who looked more like an orc than an elf. His keen spiritual sense allowed him to discover that this warrior dressed like a warrior seemed to have a strong magic aura. "So you're a spellcaster. You must be the unorthodox mage who used sound waves to fight like the three brothers defeated." "Revered messenger of the dragon's nest, I am the special envoy of the Salem tribe, Hadjar Khan. I am fully responsible for communicating and discussing the exchange of tribal warriors." Elven chanter Brock's neck was encircled by a leather tube. This was an enchanted equipment he invented to enhance the effect of sound wave. But this way, Brock's words would always be accompanied by the gurgling sound of boiling water. Originally, the chief sent the best of the best warriors as a negotiator with the idea that if the negotiation did not go well, he could use force to subdue the other party. Based on the description of the blue dragon's size from the captive, the knowledgeable chief understood that the one who had captured his son was most likely a young dragon, or at most a young dragon. Tongue-taker Brock had the experience of killing a two-headed monitor lizard and a sand elemental giant. Those monsters were close to the strength of an adult megalosaurus. As for whether or not the young dragon should ask for help from his own kind, the blue dragon's arrogant personality and the price of helping his own kind was too much for a young dragon to bear. Of course, he could not kill the young dragon. The revenge of an adult blue dragon from the dragon's nest was not something he could bear. Although he traveled day and night and caught up with the Epicurus caravan before entering the core area of the dragon's nest, he saw the young blue dragon who had captured Hucknan. But in the current situation, not to mention that the young dragon seemed to have strength that far exceeded his age, this was Brock's intuition to accurately assess the strength of his opponent. There were also 3 strong ogres standing behind the blue dragon who had turned into a human teenager. The most robust one probably had the potential to grow into an ogre warlord. The other 2 were emitting faint magic waves. These were 2 ogre spellcasters. Being able to correctly assess the situation was also a good habit of Brock. Giving up the plan to show his strength, Tongue-taker proposed a plan to deal with this situation. As the 4th son of Hadjar Khan, Hucknan has the legal right to be redeemed first. The released captives brought back news that Hucknan is still alive, so I want to exercise the right to redeem him first. Brock pulled out an elf who was obviously whipped recently from behind him and bowed slightly to Keys. "Thank you for the kindness of the powerful messenger of the dragon's nest. This is one of the captives you sent back. It was he who brought your request to the leader of Salem, Hadjar Alto." Keys could guarantee that the captives he chose to send back were those who had not suffered any injuries in the battle, and they had definitely not been whipped by Epicurus or anyone else. And the captive in front of him, who was pulled out by the messenger named Brock, had obviously encountered a disaster after returning to the tribe. The environment can really affect people. I used to think that elves were elegant and peaceful creatures. I didn't expect that in the cruel natural environment of the Ash world, The desert elves here have become so violent. Keys could not help but secretly click his tongue. Elves of Salem, I agree that you have the right to redeem the son of your tribe's chief, but I remember that the condition I asked this person to bring back is wealth that matches the identity of the chief's son. Keys looked at a few caravan warriors who brought the elf chief's son, who was tied up with a hemp rope, and motioned for them to step back and not untie the rope, including the bit that was worn to prevent the elves from yelling. Brock used his cold eyes to stop the supreme warriors behind him, who were so angry that they wanted to draw their swords when they saw Huck Nan tied up. Then he turned his head and tried to make his eyes look straight at the human boy who was the incarnation of a terrible monster. The chief taught the people of Salem that the principle of trade is fairness and justice. Since I was ordered to negotiate the redemption, I was prepared to pay an equivalent exchange. The principle of trade is fairness and justice. I'm afraid that the source of profit is from the strong bullying the weak. Paying with swords is more cost-effective than paying with money. Keys maliciously guessed at the fierce-looking messenger. Brock took out a leather scroll from his arms and showed it to the blue dragon boy. Seeing that the boy had no objection, he opened the scroll and squatted down to spread it on the carpet. This is a map, but it needs a special method to show the terrain. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the elf messenger suddenly stood up and grabbed the hair of the prisoner who was standing beside him, who had been whipped until he was covered in wounds. With a sudden force, the injured warrior was thrown to the ground by Brock. A flash of a sword cut open his armor, and like a dagger made of crystal, it accurately pierced the warrior's heart. In the hands of the cruel and powerful elf messenger, the unlucky warrior didn't even have time to beg for mercy before his life was taken away. Keys stopped Epicurus, who was frightened by the sudden killing and wanted to shout for the guards. I'm sorry to dirty your carpet, but this is a necessary method to make the map show. Using the soul dagger to harvest a fresh life is similar to condensing obsidian magic beads to cast spells. Only then can the magic circle on the map be activated. Following these clues on the map, you can find unimaginable treasures. Brock pulled out the dagger and glanced at the leader of the caravan as if he was talking about something trivial. Keys didn't care about the performance of the elf. His attention was attracted by the changes on the map. The dagger made of soul crystal turned bright red, which meant that there was already soul energy stored inside. The dagger stabbed into the map as if it was stabbed into a pool of water. The blood-red soul energy colored the whole scroll, and lines like blood vessels appeared. This magic scroll doesn't seem to be the work of the elves. Keys raised his head and asked. Indeed, this map is the equivalent of the chief's exchange, and its origin is unknown. Maybe it's a legendary treasure of the tribe, or maybe it's a treasure that was handed over after being plundered by the tribe. But I can be sure that the person who made this map is not an elf. Brock carefully answered. He could intimidate ignorant and cowardly merchants, but he had to be careful when dealing with this young man who was the incarnation of a powerful blue dragon. This map shows a secret realm to the west of the dragon's lair. After obtaining this map and finding a way to make it appear, Hajar Khan once led the elites, including myself, to explore this place indicated on the map. In the end, only Hajar and I escaped. Brock deliberately hid the results of that exploration. Then what did you find? What valuable things were there that could replace the ransom of the chief's son? As a matter of fact, we've had some problems in it, said Blatch, choosing not to use the adjective fatal for the problems. That place seemed to be the laboratory of an ancient soul-binding sorcerer who had passed away. It was a huge building hidden under the sea of sand. When we were exploring, we identified some of the words carved on the stone slabs that were similar to the ancient Elven language. Therefore, we determined that it was the lair of an ancient spellcaster. As for the conclusion that the spellcaster was an evil sorcerer, it came from the attacks of the Chimera guards we encountered. That's the domain of evil sorcerers. Chapter 21. Ancient Soul-Binding Sorcerer? Keyes had seen an introduction to this profession in the books of the Dragon's Lair and the Inheritance of Knowledge. Soul-binding sorcerers are spellcasters who use ancient bloodlines to obtain artificial supernatural bloodlines. They pursue better control of the mixed magic power flowing in the depths of their souls, as well as the true meaning of life, evolution, and creation through the creation of chimeras. It is somewhat similar to the spellcasting ability of warlocks that traces back to their bloodline through high charisma, but it is completely different from the spellcasting ability that sorcerers learn through research. However, the spellcasting ability of soul-binding sorcerers is artificially transplanted and not inherited like warlock. They are unable to construct a clear spell structure, and their power is mixed and full of destructive power. Spellcasters are used to calling it evil sorcery. Under the control of the will, soul-binding sorcerers can directly use the spellcasting power from themselves or the tragic victims to complete secret operations, control the weak souls, or directly use the magic flame to destroy the enemy, but they also have to fight against the distorted will derived from the power at all times. Perhaps the bloodline transformation of the soul-binding sorcerers in ancient times was just an unsuccessful experiment. The enthusiasm of the evil sorcerers for creating chimeras can also be understood as their hope to repair the distortion and chaos in their bodies and souls through the study of life, evolution, and creation. The legacy of spellcasters from ancient times, 2 eras before the thousands of races fought for supremacy and the rise of the human race, was immeasurable. In fact, after reading the experiment records of Cotman, Keyes had great interest in these ancient secrets that could possibly reveal why he was able to transmigrate to the Ash world. The laboratory of the ancient soul-binding sorcerers is indeed quite valuable. To put it bluntly, its value is much higher than the son of your tribe's chief that I have captured. However, I presume that your explorations have not been successful, and could even be said to have suffered heavy losses. Opportunities always coexisted with challenges, and wealth was always proportional to danger. This was a principle that could not be more obvious. Indeed, with the strength of the Salem tribe, it is simply wishful thinking to complete the exploration of these ruins. Even Brock the tongue-puller's strange voice that sounded like boiling water could not hide the bitterness in his tone. He stated in a depressed tone, "The Elven tribe has not produced a legendary-level spellcaster for too long. Even if they found another way to study the relatively simple path of sound, there are not enough high-level spellcasters. To explore these ruins without a high-level spellcaster, no matter how many warriors there are, they cannot defeat the strange traps and terrifying chimeras. In fact, our previous explorations only advanced a short distance before we were almost completely wiped out. We only encountered some low-level chimeras." Brock understood that it was impossible to hide the danger of the soul-binding sorcerer's laboratory, so he simply admitted that the tribe's exploration operations had failed. He understood that negotiation was the sorcerers had. He took out another scroll and gestured to the warriors accompanying him. One of them took out a wooden box from his backpack. "It's not that we did not gain anything. This is one of the things that Hadjer Khan and I risked our lives to bring out from the soul-binding sorcerer's laboratory." Brock opened the scroll and introduced, "We defeated the first wave of chimeras and found the workshop that produced these chimeras' weapons. It was here that we obtained the biggest reward of this trip." Brock the tongue-puller's voice suddenly rose, as if he was singing a chant. "Beasts born for war begin to show their edge, sipping hot underground oil, they do not mind the scalding heat. Armor as strong as a shield, they do not fear ordinary iron and swords, fangs and sharp teeth dig out the enemy's heart. Charging warhorses will retreat in fear when they meet them, brave warriors will tremble in fear when they meet them. Obeying the Khan's command, they defend against enemies from all sides, blood and limbs right Salem's glory." As the chant came to an abrupt end, the elven messenger suddenly opened the wooden box handed to him by his men. An organ of an unknown creature lay in the box, but it was obvious that it was not an ordinary creature. Burning fuel replaced the blood vessels that should have flowed with blood. Even the wooden box that contained the organ had traces of carbonization. At the same time, a pungent smell rushed into everyone's nostrils as the box was opened. According to the results of the deciphering, the research notes of the ancient soul-binding sorcerers and the nest of chimera production in the chimera workshop, I worked with all the high-ranking bards to research a new type of chimera belonging to the Salem tribe, the blazing shadow beast. This is the highest secret of the tribe. Other than the chieftain and myself, only a few elders and captains know about it. Brock glanced at Epicurus and the three ogre brothers who were still standing at the side. It seemed that he did not want to reveal any more. But Keyes did not say anything, so he could only continue. These war beasts have no gender. There is no way for them to give birth naturally. They can only rely on the nest of chimera to breed young. They do not need to drink water, and their combat power is amazing. They only need to be fed the black oil dug out from the ground regularly to survive and develop well. Their vitality is amazing. Even if their bodies are cut open, they will not die easily. This wooden box contains the organ of the blazing shadow beast that digests the black oil. Brock took a water bag from another warrior's attendant. It was not filled with water but black oil. He poured a little on the organ. The black oil quickly seeped into the organ. After a while, the organ, which was already a little dim in color, began to pump rhythmically. Some of the blood vessels connected to the organ flowed out burning liquid at an astonishing temperature, and the inside of the small wooden box had many more pieces of carbonized debris. Roasted meat that will cook itself. The ogre gourmet muttered softly as he looked at the blazing shadow beast's digestive organs. Seeing the blazing shadow beast digest the heat of the black oil, Keyes first thought of the red dragons that were also part of the pentashade megalosaurus. They also had the ability to devour magma. However, although dragons could live by directly eating any substance rich in energy, they would never give up their preference for flesh. He himself had relied on great willpower and rational restraint to chew on copper ore before. They don't have the abnormal digestive ability of the megalosaurus, but they are enough to be called a biological combustion engine monster, Keyes thought to himself. Compared to the chimeras that can only be stitched together now, the ancient soul-binding mages have their own unique technology. Perhaps it really is a relic of that ancient civilization. Seeing that Keyes, who had transformed into a human teenager, was a little moved, Brock added fuel to the fire. Powerful dragon emissary, the value of this map has been proven. Although Salem currently has no way to get more from here, with the legendary megalosaurus as its foundation, the dragon lair has the ability to explore this ruin. The chimeras in this wooden box can be used as evidence to provide feasible suggestions to the great legendary megalosaurus. I have to agree. This map is indeed worth the value of the son of the chieftain named Harknan. I agree to the preferential exchange agreement. You can take this elf away. Thank you for your kindness and generosity. Then, there is still the matter of the exchange of more than 100 warriors. Can you? Keyes waved his hand to stop Brock from speaking. As a previous agreement, I have traded these people to this merchant as slaves and have received the corresponding payment. If you want to discuss the return of the other Salem warriors, you can discuss it with him directly. He accepted the map and the chimera's digestive tissue and put them into his backpack. Keyes called out to his ogre friends and walked out of the small and stuffy tent. This place was very close to the dragon lair. He also had to go back and explain his absence for the past few days. As for the harvest, the dragon lair did not stipulate that he had to hand over the harvest. He was also not in a hurry to explore the soul shackle sorcerer's treasure, so there was no need to tell the old dragon about it. My ogre friends, I have to return to the dragon lair to fulfill my duty. It's still about 2 days' walk from here to the dragon lair. The trading place you followed the caravan to should be one of the old dragon's kin, the kobold settlement called Keyfoot. Keys reached out and patted the ogre's wrist. This was the highest position that his transformed body could reach. I look forward to our next meeting and exploring this world together. Keys's experience in running a party still influenced his thinking. Although there was no data to prove it, the young blue dragon could feel that the ogres had a good impression of him after a few days of interaction. Maybe if I'm still in the game, my charm would be so high that I can open the interface to recruit companions. Hee. While the young dragon was happily reminiscing about the past, in the big tent in the middle of the caravan's encampment, the slightly proud Epicurus was having a friendly negotiation with the elven messenger known as the Tongue Taker. Blazing sun above. Elven messenger of Salem, you have to understand that it was your unprovoked attack that caused my loss. The compensation from the captives as slaves is not even enough to offset half of my original loss. According to the customs of the desert, this was not an unprovoked attack. It's just that you walked into our hunting zone. Salem has the right to ask for the commercial tax that belongs to his tribe. Unfortunately, your tax officers are not proficient in the art of numbers, nor do they have any manners. They even attacked my caravan without declaring war. Salem will compensate you with 1,000 silver cats worth of gems and an oath in the name of the tribe's ancestors. In the next 3 years, your caravan will have a free stall in Salem and any bazaar in the vassal tribes. You will also not have to pay taxes when purchasing furs, weapons, and even slaves from the elven tribes. You will also have a 20% discount on the total price. As for weapons, does that include the beast called Blazing Shadow that you mentioned in your previous discussion? Epicurus asked tentatively. You're delusional. Along with the angry roar of the Tongue Taker, the accompanying elven warriors all pulled out their scimitars. All right, I just want to ask. Seeing that his guards and the elves were at daggers drawn, Epicurus awkwardly expressed that it was just a moment of curiosity. Then what's your answer? Brock motioned for the elven warriors to put away their scimitars. Deal, but you have to draft the agreement immediately, sign and seal it. I need to accept your Khan's official seal as the representative for this negotiation. As you wish, I hope your caravan will be able to obtain delightful wealth from the friendly Salem and its friends. Brock smiled and conveyed his blessings to the merchant, but in his heart he was thinking, may the thieves of the bazaar tear open your money bag and leave not a single word behind. Thank you for your wishes. May your kind words bring you long-term health and happiness. Epicurus returned the salute, but what he was really thinking was, may swords and spears be placed on your heads, you crude elven bastards who are as dumb as orcs. Bah. Chapter 22. After a friendly discussion between the elven messengers and merchants, they came to an agreement to redeem the captured tribal warriors. The slave merchants also received some cash and other compensation. After purchasing some food and water from the caravan, Brock led the redeemed warriors away from the caravan, as if he didn't want to stay for even a moment longer. As most of the warriors had lost their mounts, the elves didn't travel very quickly. Fortunately, these people were all strong warriors and wouldn't suffer too many casualties from marching on foot in the desert. Teacher Barbarossa, Harknan, who was riding beside the Tongue Taker, looked at his expressionless master and wanted to say something. Barbarossa, the orc of sound who had been killed before, was also his master's disciple. Brock only had 2 disciples in total, one of whom had inherited his warrior skills and the other his orc of sound. Now, he was the only one left. However, before he could finish speaking, Brock's anger seemed to explode. His strong hand grabbed the chief's son by the throat and pulled him off his warhorse. He then jumped off his warhorse, his fists raining down on his disciple's body. You cowardly maggot of a loser like you! What courage and strength do you have to inherit from me, Anda? If it weren't for the fact that you are his only 2 remaining children, I would have personally ended you, a defeated general who shames the tribe. Fortunately, the supreme warrior accompanying him pulled the furious Blatch away in time. Otherwise, even if he carefully avoided the vital parts, his fist would only hit the body covered with tight muscles. With the monstrous strength of the tongue puller, it was possible that he would have killed Huck Keenan if he wasn't careful. I declare that you are stripped of your status as a supreme warrior. If you want to have this honor again, you will have to use 10 times the number of human heads to wash away the shame of being captured. Now, get over there and walk out of this desert on foot with the warriors who were humiliated because of your incompetence. As if his anger hadn't subsided, Brock leaked a trace of his orc of sound and covered the entire elven troop with his strange voice. Looking at the chief's son dragging his bruised and swollen body and limping towards the marching warriors without saying a word, one of the supreme warriors who dissuaded Blatch from beating him patted his old companion on the shoulder. "Stop pretending, old man. If you're really angry, you'll turn that kid into a pile of minced meat with just a few punches." "Humph." Brock seemed to hate having his thoughts seen through. "What do you know? This is how I teach him as a qualified master. I hit him to make him remember. If you can't win, you have to run. This time, you were lucky to be captured. Not everyone needs to be captured. Barbarossa is an example." "Whatever you say, stubborn old man." The supreme warrior seemed to be very familiar with Brock, and was not taken aback by this fierce man's arrogance. "This time, we expose the hidden information of the Blaze Shadow Beasts. Will they? No, the chief has already fused with the heart of the beasts in the Blaze Shadow Beast's nest. This terrible cursed weapon will be put to use soon. The wisdom of the Samhain tribe has seen the horror of this weapon from the battlefield. Only Hajar of Salem can be the master of the desert elves." Ignoring the supreme warrior beside him, Brock jumped on his warhorse and urged the troop to continue forward. The supreme warrior had no choice but to jump on his own mount. As one of the few elven warriors who knew the inside story of the Blaze Shadow Beast's secret weapon, the supreme warrior was also one of the chief's undulls. He knew what kind of changes this weapon could bring to the current battle and even the entire desert elven tribe. Attacking the Samhain tribe was also to seize the black oil wells that they controlled far more than Salem, and the black oil was the key to limiting the size of the Chimera army. Brock naturally knew this, and in fact, he knew more. He knew that in order to control this power, Hajar, who had used his incomplete bloodline to transform and fuse with the heart of the beasts, paid the price of no longer being able to bear children. That was why he was willing to risk the danger and humiliation to redeem Hajkanen. That was why he restrained his anger, and was careful not to kill this disciple who had shamed himself and his undulls. However, what they did not expect was that although the merchant who had negotiated with them was no longer good at using curved swords, he was better at weaving nets. And it just so happened that one of the links of this net was connected to their opponent, the Samhain tribe. After they walked out of the caravan station, Epicurus released an eagle messenger with a letter. Samhain would understand some of the trouble they would encounter before they encountered it on the battlefield. The merchant believed that this letter could get him some more rewards in addition to the ransom. The core of the Dragon Nest territory, the Dragonheart Hall. This was where Sirota rested and met the Megalosaurus who came to visit. Kin like the kobolds had no right to stay here. The legendary Megalosaurus lay on a platform in the depths of the hall. Behind the platform was the secret room where he stored his treasures. 132 times, the old dragon counted silently in his heart. This was the 132nd time that he had the urge to kill this little bastard in front of him in just 2 hourglasses. He did not seem to be listening at all to the content of this insignificant dragonkin's rambling in Draconic. In fact, just the pretentious appearance of this little dragonkin in front of him made the legendary Megalosaurus extremely unhappy. What made Sirota unhappy was that this creature with the false name of God-Eater was a relatively powerful descendant of the evil dragons. However, It was far from being a match for the legendary Megalosaurus, who was about to reach the age of an extremely old dragon. This difference was not only reflected in the ability of spellcasting. Even if it was only based on physical strength, a descendant of the evil dragons with the class of barbarian and over 20 centimeters in size would not be a match for the old dragon that was 5 times its size. There was also a difference between legendary and legendary. Enough, you ignorant and noisy little bastard. The old dragon's patience had reached its limit. The dragon tail strike came before the sound. However, this descendant of the evil dragons was still a legendary warrior. Although it was not a good sight to behold, it still managed to dodge Sorota's attack by a hair's breadth. Sorota, are you going to reject the call of the great dragon queen, the 5-headed Megalosaurus Tiamat? You, the legendary Megalosaurus' thunderous breath directly interrupted the descendant of the evil dragons before he could finish his words. The God-Eater had extremely high resistance to lightning. Although the electric shock burned him, it did not completely incapacitate him. However, Sorota's huge front claws took advantage of this gap and firmly grasped him in the palm of his hand. Unlike the Drakons, the first descendant of the evil dragons was created by an ancient dragon mask that was close to a weak divine power that was loyal to Tiamat. The original individual of this life did not come from heredity. Instead, it used non-dragon blood and a special ritual to hatch a dragon egg that was already dead, giving birth to a new monster with dragon characteristics. The first dead dragon eggs were provided by the colorless Megalosaurus that was loyal to the Dragon Queen. As time passed, each descendant of the evil dragons formed a new race, and their tempers were very similar to the dragons that were similar to them. The ritual to create the first descendant of the evil dragons was recorded in many ancient books, so that new types could still be created. However, due to unknown reasons, only the red dragon, the black dragon, and the blue dragon were the most numerous descendant of the evil dragons. The last descendant of the red dragon, the flame weaver, was a huge beast that looked like a sauropod dinosaur with some intelligence. This cumbersome creature could spit out balls of fire and burn a single target to ashes. When faced with close-range attacks, it would display the savagery of the red dragon. At the same time, it was too slow to escape from most threats, so it would fight until it was killed, and then explode in an attempt to take the enemy down with it. The last descendant of the black dragon, the net weaver, this creature appeared in abandoned caves. It had a slender body similar to the black dragon, and looked like a large spider with scales and a tail. It liked to catch and eat unlucky people that passed by. It could not spit acid like the black dragon, but it could weave acid into a net. Although its corrosive power was much weaker than that of the Megalosaurus, it was more than enough to cause more trouble and pain to the opponent. In fact, it was a habit of relying on its stealth ability to stay hidden, and then use collision charge to charge at an opponent. After dealing a physical blow to the opponent, the net would exhaust the prey's last bit of strength. The last descendant of the blue dragon, the God-Eater, to be honest, was the most powerful of the last descendant of the evil dragons. Even if it was defeated by Sorota in an instant, this monster still had the power to destroy a city. They were used to wielding large swords to attack, and could use a few of the blue dragon's spell-like abilities. The last descendant of the blue dragon, the God-Eater, was originally created to fight against the angels, dragons, and dragon descendants who were loyal to the good dragon god Bahamut. However, they were much smarter than the other last descendant of the evil dragons, and were very good at pleasing the Dragon Queen. Currently, a small number of them were also taking on the role of the Dragon Queen's servants, performing tasks such as envoys. The last descendant of the evil dragons were originally hatched from dead dragon eggs, so they did have some of the dragon's genetic characteristics. Moreover, although their growth potential was not comparable to that of a real Megalosaurus, and their strength basically reached the limit of an adult Megalosaurus, they did not need to go through the period of being weak and young dragons. They only needed to be born with the strength of a young dragon. although they inherited some of the dragon's characteristics, and were not a species that could reproduce quickly, compared to the Megalosaurus, they formed a population much faster. In all fairness, this species was more qualified to be a subordinate of the evil dragon god. However, Sarota hated this kind of creature, and there were many Megalosaurus who had the same attitude as him. Although the blue dragon was an evil Megalosaurus that was in the lawful camp, the mother of the 5-colored dragons, the 5-headed dragon god, Tiamat, and even maintained a belief that was above the baseline. However, this kind of monster that was originally produced from dead dragon eggs made many old Megalosaurus think of Dracolic, skeletal dragon, and other creatures that would fly into a rage just by hearing about them. For example, although Sarota was an evil blue dragon, the nature of the population allowed him to bring back Keys, who had nothing to do with him, to hatch and raise him. However, after interacting with this last descendant of the evil dragon for less than 2 hourglasses, he had already crushed this desecrated dragon egg in his hand like a bug. The giant dragon's eyes glanced at the struggling last descendant of the evil dragon in his hand, as if an adult was holding a struggling mouse in his hand. Sarota could not help but feel disgusted, and there was an impulse in his heart to torture and kill it. Chapter 23. In the end, reason prevailed over emotional factors. Sarota used the spell Force Cage to control the last descendant of the blue dragon, the Godslayer, who he hated so much. He took the war mobilization order brought by the messenger of the Dragon Queen and looked at it. The conscription order was not issued by Tiamat herself. It might have been made by a powerful primordial dragon who acted as her advisor on behalf of the Dragon Queen. The dragon used its own scale as a carrier to record information that could be accurately identified by its own kind. Holding this scale, Sarota could feel that the primordial dragon who issued the order on behalf of the Dragon Queen was likely to have a certain bloodline relationship with Sarota, but it was not strong. They were definitely not blood relatives within 3 generations. The content of the order was as follows: To the legendary Megalosaurus Sarota, I am Lord Tiamat's subordinate, the 3rd member of the Evil Dragon Council, Heaven's Blade Zaphel, your 6th ancestor. According to the bloodline contract, the Blue Dragon clan of the Dragon's Lair is summoned to fulfill the Evil Dragon Covenant. Within 200 hourglasses after receiving the conscription order, you are to bring all the descendants of your clan who are close to the standard of an adult Megalosaurus to the Pillar of Skulls of Avernus. The war that belongs to you is about to begin. Junior, remember this. The victors will receive endless rewards. The losers will only embrace death. So, use all your power as much as possible. Do not hide it. Be careful to use it one by one. Be careful to use it one by one. Repeating Zaphel's message, Sarota thought to himself, he probably wants me to be of some use. The experience and knowledge that came with age made Sarota very clear where Avernus and the Pillar of Skulls were. He also knew what the war in the letter referred to. It was probably a terrifying plane that even the worst nightmares could not touch. This was not a sensational thing. Avernus was the first layer of the 9 layers of hell. The entire plain was a scorched wasteland full of rubble. Occasionally, towering mountains and sloping hills broke the monotonous landscape. The climate there was hot, but it was not as dry as the ash world. The blood that flowed from some unknown life form covered the earth like a stream and eventually flowed into the Styx River of this plain. The air was filled with a blood-red mist, and fireballs would fall from the sky from time to time. If one's fire resistance was not high enough, or if there was no hole to hide in, the creature hit by the fireball would explode and turn into a pile of decorations on the vast land. As for the skull pillar, it was an unfinished structure that was constantly growing in length and thickness. Apart from the shells of souls that were constantly being drained of every last bit of value, the imps that were constantly being reborn, and the imps that were constantly trying to ascend, it was a 12-layered fortress that was constantly being reinforced and strengthened. It was also an unfinished structure that was constantly being lengthened and thickened. If someone were to write a travel guide to Avernus, they would definitely include this attraction. Billions, no, at least tens of billions, of demonic skulls from the bottomless abyss were used to construct the largest spectacle in the multiverse with exquisite architectural skills. What was even more amazing was that due to the powerful vitality of the abyssal monsters, it was not difficult to find some construction materials that were still alive on this spectacle. Some of them spoke in the language of Tannery, while others spoke in the more ancient language of Obilus. Some were begging for a quick death, while others were cursing everything they could think of and see with blasphemous words. But there was no need to worry. These demonic skulls could no longer wreak havoc and cause damage. In fact, if one ignored the noise, the power of their language was not even comparable to the fireballs that often fell from the sky. This was because there was a powerful existence from the Order faction stationed here all year round. Her existence alone was enough to suppress the remaining power of these demons. Tiamat was the common ancestor of all the five-colored Megalosaurus. She was the five-headed evil dragon god, the good dragon god, the eternal enemy of the platinum dragon king Bahamut, and the ally of the existence at the bottom of the 9 prisons of Bader, Nessus. Her lair was built in the huge pit at the bottom of the Pillar of Skulls in Avernus. Here, her true body could continuously absorb the generous gift of Bartho's law of order due to the victory of order over chaos. Of course, all of the above was just the background of the war that was just beginning to be introduced. The scale of this war was so huge, and the time it lasted was so long. The most lasting impact that any existence could hope to leave behind in the Blood War was to leave behind a chronicle in this war. Why did this war happen? There were many legends, but the most believable one was the explanation that the Blood War was the history of Astamor's rise to power. Legend had it that the Master of 9 Hells was fulfilling the first covenant with the gods from the ancient era of the Order gods. That was how he started this great war that swept through almost every corner of the multiverse. The first covenant stipulated that Astamors could lead his army to the 9 prisons of Bader as a base to resist the invasion of the demons from the bottomless abyss to the various planes. Fight evil with evil, and violence with violence. The Master of 9 Hells obtained from the oath that he could use the evil energy in the souls of mortals to replenish the power of himself and his subordinates, the Barthas demons, who were also known as demons by the mortals. However, this war exceeded the expectations of everyone, including the powerful gods, and evolved into a contest of the essence of order and chaos. The battlefield of the Blood War was like a meat grinder that could never be filled, involving the fates of countless planes and creatures. There had been many good gods with great divine power who wanted to stop this bloody war, but they had all misjudged their own strength. Many gods had even become nutrients for this war. None of the gods dared to try to stop this terrible war, because they knew that even the gods who ruled over death would not be able to protect themselves from the tides of war once they were involved in it. The river Styx that flowed through the Blood War and was infected by it would drag the gods' kingdoms into the Blood War. However, as the war continued, the devils and demons gradually discovered that this war was not completely meaningless. Under the guidance of the results of the war, local victories and defeats would bring about an explosive increase in the laws of order or chaos. Creatures of the corresponding factions would be able to obtain an increase in their life essence. After a battle, if Bador was victorious, a top-tier Barthas pit fiend could advance to the battlefield. Similarly, if Bador was victorious in the abyss, there was a chance that a little Dretch could advance to become an abyssal flame fiend. Since then, the evil and greedy creatures of the lower planes had worked hard to maintain the continuation of the war. The Blood War had become a training ground for them to increase their strength. There were even some creatures from other planes who took the initiative to throw themselves into this terrifying war that had yet to end in order to obtain power and wealth, hoping to gain the favor of order or chaos. Of course, most of these creatures became fertilizer for the war. Chapter 24. Sarota was not stupid. It was not wrong to say that he was a wise old dragon. He did not think highly of himself, nor did he want to be treated as fertilizer. Out of his passion for a comfortable life and his strong survival instincts, the legendary dragon wanted very much to end the little bastard who sent him the letter that pissed him off. Then, he would destroy the letter of the old immortal whose bloodline was unfathomably similar to his own, pretending that he did not know or have never met him. But he could not. After years of study, his casting skills were as proficient as eating and drinking, and it gave him the ability to see through the surface of things. And the contents of the bloodline contract clearly stated in the letter, and Sarota's senses told him that this was not an imaginary threat, but an objective fact. I'm afraid that the ancestors of the Ash world who migrated to this world from other planes had no choice but to compromise with the Dragon Queen due to the pressure of survival, Sarota analyzed rationally. Although he had enough respect for the evil dragon god, the Ash world had not believed in gods for a long time, so the old dragon born in this plane was not as devout as the natives of this world. The contents of this contract are very similar to the style of the 9 prisons of Bader, and even a little like the Styx contract. If I go against it, I'm afraid that the entire dragon nest with my bloodline will be in danger. I can only go to that damned place and risk my life. According to the requirements of the draft order, Sarota, who had become a legendary, needed to lead his army to the first level of Bader, Avernus, to pay homage to the evil dragon god, and serve under him for 100 years. The other adult blue dragon also needed to stay for 20 years. As for the young dragons, they only needed to wait for 1 or 2 years before they could fulfill their promise and return to the dragon nest. But that was Avernus, the front line of the bloody war. Sarota's power that far exceeded that of an ordinary legendary was not worth mentioning there. Powerful beings as strong as demigods or even gods could be annihilated from time to time. The old dragon had the most pessimistic guess that there would be a few of his people who would be lucky enough to survive this war and return. Thinking of this, Sarota looked at the last evil dragon descendant who was struggling in the force field cage, while sneering at the old dragon who had just finished reading the conscription order. The malice in his heart grew even stronger. Old dragon, do you have the courage to face the wrath of the great 5-headed dragon god, or do you have the courage to face the curse of violating the bloodline contract? Ha ha! The legendary tier blue dragon who had been enraged by the arrogant and rude emissary suddenly calmed down. Then, he casually cast a spell and turned himself into a half-dragon that was about the same height as the last evil dragon descendant. Then, he approached the force field cage and spoke with an unhurried tone. I have to say that I don't have that kind of strength. Out of respect for the great dragon queen Tiamat, I will definitely abide by this contract and fight for her. With a flick of his finger, the old dragon's unique secret imprint was imprinted on the enlistment order. This was the sign of fulfilling the contract. As the contract was established, the ancient dragon scale that carried the will of Bartho to summon Sarota suddenly shattered into tiny ashes, scattering from the Megalosaurus's palm. Last question, are you considered strong in your tribe? Are you qualified to personally serve the Dragon Queen and listen to her orders? Sarota's strange question made the evil dragon emissary a little confused. However, he still arrogantly replied, Of course I am a strong warrior. My ranking in the tribe is close to the dozen or so ancestors that were first created. It's just that I haven't received the honor of meeting the great Dragon Queen yet. Wait a little longer. Without waiting for the last evil dragon descendant to finish speaking, the old dragon revealed a look of understanding. The half-dragon's face that resembled a true dragon actually squeezed out a smile. Then, goodbye. A long-prepared spell of greater disjunction directly penetrated the force field cage and bombarded the body of the last evil dragon descendant. There was no scream, no flesh and blood. A legendary warrior who was still alive just a moment ago was directly disintegrated into tiny ashes. God Slayer, is there really such a weak god for you to kill? Ignorant and stupid weak creation, you have tainted the little bloodline inheritance of the true dragon for nothing. If such a weak being could be called strong in the tribe, then the overall strength of the tribe could be imagined. Without the direct favor of the Dragon Queen, it would be a waste of effort to kill him. Sarota knew very well that the evil dragon god was the mother of the pentashade dragons, not the mother of the last evil dragon descendant. After dealing with this annoying fellow, Sarota's mood improved a little. It had been a long time since he cast a spell in battle, but the practice just now did not seem to be unfamiliar with it. Only then would he feel more at ease when he went to a dangerous place like the blood battlefield. Hey, little guy, what are you doing hiding there? Is there a problem with your patroller? Sarota did not transform back into his true dragon form. He stretched his half-dragon body as if trying to adapt to this form. He had already noticed Keys, who had come to the Dragon Heart Hall. The young dragon walked in from behind the huge door pillar at the entrance of the Dragon Heart Hall. Even if he was extraordinarily developed, his true dragon form was not inferior to the average young blue dragon. However, he was still not much taller than a legendary megalosaurus in half-dragon form. What kind of half-dragon is this old dragon's spell mimicking? Don't tell me it's half-megalosaurus or half-giant. Although he was thinking about some unimportant and boring questions in his mind, he still had to be respectful on the surface. After Keys Fetton stepped into the Dragon Heart Hall, he lowered his famous, giant head in respect to Sarota. Respected Master of the Dragon Nest, my instructor, Thunder Lord Sarota. Fortunately, the frequency of many syllables in the dragon language could represent different meanings, so the long string of honorifics did not seem too cumbersome. This is my 26th hunting mission in the Dragon Nest territory. I submit to you a detailed report of this mission. With that, the blue dragon Keys stood up and cast a spell to show his secret imprint. Sarota could use the power of magic to quickly read the report in the secret imprint using the rules he had set in advance. Sarota felt a sense of closeness as he looked at his brethren hatched from the dragon eggs he brought back from his most recent exploration. His direct descendants, who were closest to him by blood, had already left the dragon nest due to their inability to challenge his position as master of the nest. They had no hope of promotion and even left this world to explore their own legendary path and build their own dragon nest. Perhaps in the future, unless he encountered an accident or was unable to face a challenge by himself, he would not be able to meet them again in this life. Although the life of a dragon was long, and creatures who had lived for a long time would slowly become indifferent to family, he was still an extremely old dragon after all. He had not lived for tens of thousands of years like the immemorial dragons, and naturally would not have such an indifferent temperament. The young megalosaurus who stayed in the dragon nest, even the oldest adult dragon, were of his bloodline several generations later. Except for the little dragon in front of him who looked exceptionally sturdy. He was brought back to the dragon nest by Sarota himself and hatched from the egg. In terms of feelings, compared to the older, unfilial children, who were focused on defeating their father to become the master of the nest, this little dragon of his kind, although growing at an astonishing speed, would not threaten his position in the next 1,000 years. Such a Keys was very much loved by Sarota. After briefly checking the information in the secret imprint, Sarota learned that his tribute caravan had been attacked and that other huge beasts that could threaten the dragon nest had been hunted down. He waved his hand to disperse the secret imprint and secretly stared at Keys. He knew that this little guy was hiding something, including the fact that he had found the copper mine and secretly occupied it. But he understood that this was the nature of a blue dragon, secretly accumulating all the power and working hard to become stronger. That was how he had grown up before. However, things were different now. Although he was only a young dragon, Keys, who had the strength of a young dragon, would definitely follow him and lead the powerful dragon nest to Avernus. Perhaps he would encounter more opportunities that belonged to him, but it was more likely that he would meet with misfortune and die prematurely. Thinking that this little dragon was as obsessed with beautiful spells as he was when he was young, Sarota felt that he should teach him something before the expedition to Baator. With a wave of his hand, a huge spellbook was handed to him from the platform where the old dragon often rested. Even though Sarota's half-dragon form had the body of a giant, this spellbook was still too big. The cover of the spellbook was made from the skin of a scroll dragon that Sarota had killed when he became an adult. The small and dense scales that were like fish scales emitted a rainbow light. Flipping open his spellbook, the old dragon found the corresponding page and gently spread out the spellbook's introduction, casting tips, and even the metamagic abilities that he was used to using completely copied the spellbook onto a new scroll. After finishing all this, he carefully closed the book and threw the spellbook to the platform where he rested. He then handed the scroll that recorded the complicated spellbook to the little dragon in front of him. "Little dragon, you did a good job patrolling. This is your reward. The 9th circle spell Mordenkainen's Disintegration, also known as the Great Disintegration. This is a powerful spell that was invented by a talented and powerful human spellcaster from another world. But I think that with your wisdom and ability as a blue dragon, you should be able to understand its mysteries. P.S. The Styx contract is one of the higher-level contracts in the D&D series. It is of a higher level than the contracts made by ordinary demons. Gods and creatures as powerful as gods will use this contract to make an oath. The price of violating the contract is not something that ordinary weak gods can bear." Chapter 25. Keyes did not expect to see the 3 ogre brothers again so soon. After reporting back to Sarota in the Dragonheart Hall, Keyes spent 5 days analyzing the high-grade spell that Sarota had bestowed upon him. This was a rare reward. It was the nature of the blue dragon race to cherish their own things. Even blood relatives rarely had the tradition of sharing precious knowledge. As a reward, the inheritance of Mordenkainen's Disjunction was obviously too generous. This was beyond the limits of the dragon race's inherited knowledge, the ability to cast an 8th circle spell of a higher level. Even as natural magical creatures, dragons had to slowly explore and learn before they could try to master this level of spell ability. Only by mastering knowledge could one truly belong to oneself. Keyes naturally understood this principle. He used the familiar method of categorizing and analyzing documents to learn this 9th circle spell in the shortest time possible. Spell name: Mordenkainen's Disjunction, Sarota's modified version. Spell description: Mordenkainen was not the most powerful of the living mages of Pharaones, but he was the most creative. Almost all spellcasters had heard of his astonishing achievements in the field of magic, and his skills and knowledge in the field of magic and politics were even more widely known. Mordenkainen's Disjunction was an advanced 9th circle spell that he had created based on the 7th circle spell, Disjunction. This powerful 9th circle spell that Sarota had modified was even more powerful. It could achieve a disjunction effect that the original 7th circle spell could not achieve, and at the same time effectively avoided the negative effects of indiscriminate disintegration on enchanted items. In the face of such a spell, ordinary defensive spells would have no effect. If one was accidentally hit by such a spell and had not learned its counterspell, turning into dust was the only outcome one could imagine. Spellcasting materials. This 9th circle spell modified by the legendary blue dragon Sarota not only increased the power of the 7th circle disjunction, but also cleverly recorded the technique of spellcasting without materials. The mage only needed to follow the steps in the spellcasting instructions, spend some time and energy, and memorize this spell more precisely. In battle, the mage would be able to exert the power of the spell through words alone. Some masters with the silent spellcasting technique could even instantly activate such a powerful spell with a single thought, turning the target into dust. abnormal condition. Seems to be affected by the structure of the corpus callosum in the brain, similar to that of dolphin-like creatures. As a spellcaster, you naturally do not need to hibernate to memorize spells. As long as your mental strength can communicate with the source of mystery, the power of the spell will always be at your disposal. Memorize while casting the spell. Note, this seems to be a new type of magical technique. You need to carefully study and develop more functions. The corpus callosum of dolphin-like creatures? Keyes's attention was drawn to the abnormality while he was combing through his thoughts. This was probably what was mentioned in Votman's work log. In order to defeat our terrifying opponent, we've come up with many plans to prepare for war. Among them, there are adaptive modifications to some naturally advanced creatures. His own egg was brought back from the depths of the ruins by Sirota. His own dragon egg might have undergone a bloodline modification known as adaptive modifications in ancient times, resulting in some unknown evolution. However, I only discovered the phenomenon of adaptive changes when I learned more advanced spells. Could it be that this autonomous evolution has yet to be finalized after birth, and is still passively evolving? Keyes had all sorts of guesses, but he lacked crucial evidence. I have to start investigating the hidden secrets of the ancient ruins civilization immediately. Otherwise, this uncontrollable situation could cost me my life one day. Keyes thought of the genetic experiments similar to bloodline modification before he transmigrated. Most of the modified experimental subjects died from genetic breakdown. It was an extremely tragic way to die. Just as Keyes discovered the problem and was about to start solving it, Sirota's summons interrupted his plans. A loud dragon's roar reverberated throughout the dragon lair. Dragon's roar was a high-level application of dragon language. Keyes could only set aside the problem he discovered when he heard his name in the roar. He walked out of his lair and hurried towards the gathering point of the legendary Megalosaurus. When he arrived at the huge square below the Dragonheart Hall, Keyes discovered that the legendary Megalosaurus Sirota had already summoned all of the adult dragons and a small number of juvenile dragons, as well as his extraordinary young dragon. Including Sirota himself, there were a total of 26 huge Megalosaurus present. Fortunately, the square was paved with gravel and mortar, so these behemoths did not have to rub shoulders with one another. Keyes discovered that Sirota had not only summoned the Megalosaurus, but many other dragonkin tribes were also gradually gathering in the square. It was just that they could not arrive as quickly as the Megalosaurus that could fly. Keyes could tell these little creatures apart from the simple flags and unique tribal tattoos they carried. Could it be that a war is about to break out? Looking at the desert kobolds, sand lizardmen, and some draconic vipers that arrived one after another, Keyes discovered that these dragonkin were all young warriors of the tribe. None of them were old or weak. Then, he remembered seeing the legendary Megalosaurus killing the last descendant of the evil dragon in a rage a few days ago. It was enough for him to make some guesses. There were many Megalosaurus who had the same guess as him. From time to time, they would converse in Draconic in a low voice, guessing who the target of the war was and what they might gain. The blue dragon did not even think about the possibility of losing the war. A war involving more than 20 Megalosaurus would only be a nightmare for their opponent. Quiet little reptiles. Sirota propped up his upper body from his prone position and scolded the noisy Megalosaurus with a stern and cold voice. Perhaps you have all kinds of guesses, but you have all foolishly underestimated the intensity of the possible battle. Because the war we are about to fight will take place in the distant Avernus. I have received the summons of the evil dragon god. According to the bloodline contract, the tribe must fulfill the obligation of war. Hearing the old dragon's words, all the Megalosaurus present fell into silence. The blue dragon could be said to be the most scheming Megalosaurus of the pentashade dragons. At this time, when they heard that the location of the war was the 9 prisons of Bader, and that they might have to participate in the never-ending bloody war, even the most optimistic blue dragon would carefully calculate the chances of survival. Bloody war. So the news of the last descendant of the evil dragon that was killed that day angered the old dragon. But am I not a dragon whelp at that age? Isn't it suicide for a megalosaurus of my level to go to that place? Keyes was no stranger to the few words that Sirota said. He quickly connected the dots. Of course I don't want to go to the battlefield where even the legendary megalosaurus might fall. I also don't want to waste the lives of you little reptiles. The gigantic Sirota seemed to understand the thoughts of the megalosaurus below him. He particularly helplessly said slowly to the astonished young dragons. The contract stipulates that all megalosaurus above the peak of the young dragon must participate in this expedition to shed the last drop of blood for our dragon queen. Chapter 26. After Sirota called for war, the first dragon clan to arrive were the desert kobolds under the command of the legendary megalosaurus. Thousands of strong young warriors from the three clans, Strong Tooth, Sharp Claw, and Strong Foot, stood in front of the many dragon clan members who were waiting under the leadership of their respective blue dragon priests. It had to be said that the legendary megalosaurus had spent a lot of effort in managing the dragon clan territory. It was rare to see a few core clan warriors with uniform armor and weapons. The core clans such as Strong Tooth, Sharp Claw, and Strong Foot were all equipped with tanned leather armor and had an abundant supply of food. These young desert kobolds even looked stronger than the human army. Of course, no matter how strong these clan warriors were, they could not stop the three ogre brothers. Keyes saw the three ogres standing behind the Strong-Foot kobold warriors at a glance. They were standing among the slave warriors of the other clans who were dependent on the dragon clan. The ogres' height gave them good vision, and their vision was sharp enough. Naturally, they could see Keyes waving his claws at them. Of course, only the smart gourmet blue and the steady witch Dr. Paru noticed this. Paru could not distinguish a young blue dragon from so many blue dragons that looked similar except for the size. Of course, this also had to do with the fact that Keyes's body was actually larger than the average young dragon. As all the troops arrived one after another, the legendary megalosaurus leaped from the cliff in front of the Dragon Heart Hall into the sky. The shadow of the dragon's wings almost covered the entire Dragon Nest Canyon. The expedition was imminent. In order to appease the tribal alliance and maintain order in the Dragon Clan, he had to make arrangements in advance. I, the master of the Dragon Clan, the legendary Blue Dragon Sirota, appoint my attendant, the Blue Dragon Priest, the legendary chief of the Sharp-Tooth tribe, Malongo Sharp-Tooth, to be in charge of guarding the Dragon Clan during my expedition. Sirota naturally spoke in the dragon language. Most of the core clans were dragon descendants, so most of them could understand. After he announced the first appointment, an exceptionally strong kobold leaped up and moved to the square where the megalosaurus were squatting. He gestured to all the dragon clans. I'm about to launch a foreign expedition that will be limited to 100 years. Those who are recruited by me, regardless of whether they are megalosaurus, kobolds, or drakes, must cross this portal with me. The legendary megalosaurus hovered in the air with magic. It moved its claws and chanted spells one after another. This was the powerful incantation spell, Portal Between Worlds. Under Sirota's casting, this spell had been modified to a certain extent. The chanting time required was shorter, the range of the portal was larger, and it was more stable. However, the magic power required was 3 times more. On the square, as the legendary megalosaurus chanted, a huge stone door slowly rose. The granite door, which was completely formed by magic, rose to a point where an adult megalosaurus could easily pass through. Then, it stopped rising and growing. The whirlpool-like blue magic energy in the middle of the stone door emitted an astonishing magic wave. A vague, solemn, magnificent, and incomparably evil aura came from the other side of the door. Hiss! Keys inhaled a breath of cold air. The old dragon really hid his strength well. Keys had carefully studied this spell in order to figure out the reason for his transmigration. He knew very well how much magic power was needed to support the cross-realm teleportation of such a large-scale army. If the human spellcasters of this world used magic similar to that of Adas, I'm afraid they would need the life force of at least 10,000 slaves as equivalent magic power to build this portal. Keys was secretly shocked by the old dragon's hidden strength. In fact, he still had some misconceptions. Of course, Sarota's ability to use the source of mystery to cast spells was very powerful, and this spell did indeed require a large amount of magic power to support it. However, it was far less amazing than Keys had estimated. The reason was very simple. This portal was connected to the 9 prisons of Bader. As the saying went, it's easy to be bad, but difficult to be good. It was far easier to fall into hell than to rise to heaven. In terms of inclusiveness, even the most generous divine kingdom was not as inclusive as the 9 prisons of Bader or the bottomless abyss. Whether it was a saint who did good all his life or a criminal who was full of evil, as long as the seed of depravity was planted in his heart, he could easily find a place for himself in the lower realm. Mortal creatures had to pay a price to go to Bader from the material plane where they lived, but the price was much less than climbing out of the 9 prisons. Bader, this was hell, a place where compassion withered and resentment flourished. This was the home of the devil. Avernus, the first level of Bader, the eternal front line of the eternal blood war. When Keys first set foot on this legendary land, although he still had many fears about the future, he still felt some excitement in his heart. Walking out of the portal, the young blue dragon did not feel any dizziness or discomfort due to his excellent physique. Looking up, he could see an endless wasteland of blood-red gravel as far as the eye could see. Occasionally, there were a few hills or ravines dotting this land. The elemental concentration in the air of Bader was much higher than in the material plane, so it was relatively easy to cast spells here. In fact, in Avernus, even the beasts that wandered the wasteland and lacked intelligence had some spell-like abilities. Apart from the higher elemental concentration, this plane also had a strong law of order. As natural creatures of the evil alignment of order, the blue dragon felt that their strength had increased somewhat here. However, Sarota still restrained his own race and had the blue dragon cast a protective flame barrier. After all, the army he brought with him was not like the Megalosaurus, who could ignore the exploding fireballs falling from the sky from time to time. Although most of the tribal warriors would be cannon fodder in the blood war in the future, they still had to contribute their strength to the Blue Dragon Lord on the battlefield. Waiting for the army to walk out of the portal one after another, some of the lower realm beasts that wandered the wastelands of Bader spied on the army that carried the aura of the prime material plane. This was due to the greedy and bloodthirsty nature of the hell creatures. However, due to the fact that there were too many powerful dragons in the group, these beasts did not have the courage to take action even though they had the desire to hunt. Sarota had already used his secret imprint to complete the execution of the bloodline contract. As soon as he arrived in Avernus, some of the servants in the army of the Dragon Queen who were responsible for confirming the recruitment of soldiers were informed of his arrival. In less than an hourglass, a dragonborn hero loyal to the evil dragon god came to receive Sarota and his army. Although there were many devils in the army of the Dragon Queen, it was still easier for Tiamat to entrust creatures with dragon bloodlines with important tasks. Good thing it's not those disgusting creatures that blaspheme the bloodline of the Megalosaurus. The legendary blue dragon was rather pleased that it was a powerful dragonkin weapon master of the Iron Heart faction who received it instead of a new descendant of the evil dragons. It even turned into half-dragon form as a sign of respect and began to converse with the emissary. "I am Sarota, following the war summons of the great Dragon Queen, and have come to Avernus to perform the service stipulated in the contract." Welcome, powerful legendary Megalosaurus, to this land. I am the receptionist of the Evil Dragon Council under the command of the Great Dragon Queen, Murano Chao Feng. Please follow me to the Evil Dragon Court of the Skull Pillar. After paying respects to Her Highness Tiamat, you and your troops will be properly settled. As you wish. After the greetings, Sirota led the army of the Dragon Nest tribe and followed the Chao Feng dragonborn warrior named Murano, embarking on the journey to the Skull Pillar. Along the way, there were occasionally powerful hell beasts that wanted to ambush the army. Before Sirota could do anything, Murano, who led the army, waved his double-headed spear and easily dealt with these troubles. This kind of combat technique that's close to magic is probably the special ability of the Ironheart warrior known as the Weapon Master. Keys, who saw the powerful dragonborn warrior on the way, thought to himself, maybe I should learn the combat techniques of different fighting schools. When I transform into my human form, I rely too much on the strength of dragons, but if I can't hit my opponent, then no matter how strong I am, it's useless. Long before coming to Avernus, Sirota had instructed his people to transform into their humanoid forms as much as possible in battle. If they really couldn't win, then they could transform into the true form of the Megalosaurus. After all, the huge size of the Megalosaurus would attract too much attention in a bloody battle, and it would be easy to be targeted by the demon army. Keys had made up his mind to keep this in mind in this dangerous war. As long as he could stay alive for 2 years, he could leave Avernus according to the contract and return to the material plane. Since the Blue Dragon had to cast a fire protection barrier on the Dragon Nest tribe, they had to follow the army on the ground slowly. After walking for almost a day, a huge city wall appeared in front of them. Looking at it from afar, they could not even see the corner of the wall. Outside the city wall, there were many scaffolding made of various materials and countless soul shells with blood-red bodies. This was the initial fate of the villains who fell into Baator. There were also many lesser demons, who were constantly repairing the huge city wall under the whips of higher-level imps or barbed demon overseers. From time to time, some of the scaffolding that was not up to standard would collapse, causing a group of laborers to wail and fall into the burning moat below the city wall. This is the Bronze Citadel. Now we are building the 13th city wall. The lord of this term, Bardi, the dragonborn warrior, stopped himself from slandering the lord of the first layer of Avernus, but he still showed a look of disdain. The stronger demons in the abyss can teleport infinitely over short distances every day. Without the dimensional anchor spell, no matter how big the city wall is, it won't be able to stop those disgusting demons. The demons of Barthas like to do such useless work. This race is definitely a bureaucratic race. Fortunately, Lord Astamores of the Nine Hells invited the Great Dragon Queen to be the commander of this battle. As a guide, it was his responsibility to briefly explain the situation of Baator and the Blood Station to the army recruited by the Dragon Queen. As the army continued to move forward, the Skull Pillar finally entered the site of the Dragon Nest tribe. Ironheart. Although it was not stated in the early settings of D&D, it was still assumed that the most powerful class was the mage class. There was even a saying that, legends have no rights if they can't cast spells. In order to balance things out, the monks and warriors in the later stages of the game had some schools that were similar to spells. The warrior class introduced 9 fighting schools: White Raven, Iron Heart, Pious Heart, Steel Spirit, Desert Wind, Stone Dragon, Tiger Claw, Twilight, and Shadowhand. Among them, Iron Heart belonged to the school of weapon masters, who preferred to control their own weapons and bodies. Note: in the original setting of D&D, Baator only had a weak tendency towards order. The strong tendency towards order in this chapter was fabricated. My thoughts are: 1. The Barthas tribe used the souls of sinners to improve their power and transformed Baator for so many years. As their nest, there should be some racial bonuses. 2. The main character is still in a relatively weak stage. Maybe a slight bonus could bring some strength. 3. In order to outline the plot, there will be further discussions in this area. So I changed this setting, please don't mind it too much. Chapter 27. The Pillar of Skulls. A gigantic skull that symbolized the evil spoils of war, stood quietly in the gravel wasteland of Avernus, the first level of Bottor. There was a huge hole at the bottom of this epic creation. The lair of the pentashade dragon god Tiamat was built here. This was the location of the evil dragon court that all pentashade megalosaurus knew about. Following the dragonborn warrior, the army of the Dragon Lair tribe walked into the huge military camp that was preparing for war outside the evil dragon court. The scale of this military camp was far beyond the imagination of any material plane army leader. The legendary megalosaurus Sarota led the tribe army into the military camp. It was like a drop of water flowing into a river. It did not cause any ripples. Your Excellency Sarota, according to the orders of the Evil Dragon Council, you have arrived at the designated meeting point. As a legendary megalosaurus, you have the right to go to the Imperial Court alone to meet the Great Dragon Queen and listen to her teachings. Then what about my tribe now? There is less than a month until the enemy force of this battle, the 489th level of the Abyss, converges in Avernus. Your matured kin will need to lead your tribe warriors and wait with the army gathered by the Imperial Court. After the battle begins, you will lead them to participate in the main battle, the Dragonborn warrior explained seriously according to his duty. As for the young dragons who have yet to reach adulthood, they will be separated. They will lead their own troops or join some bot or mercenary camp. They will first adapt to this battle in some low-intensity battlefield. Well arranged. Praise the benevolent Dragon Queen. A high-level magic shield shining with magical light appeared in Sarota's hand. This was the spoils of war he got from fighting a team of adventurers when he was young. He passed it to the Dragonborn warrior whose eyes lit up. I shall pay my respects to the great evil dragon god. Please accept my gift, and please take care of my young descendants. The legendary Megalosaurus pointed its claw at several blue dragons that had yet to reach adulthood, including Keys. Although the Dragon Queen is benevolent, it is still too dangerous for young dragons who have yet to see the big picture to participate in this expedition. Bribery was one of the basic communication methods in Bottor. This method played a very important role in the path of promotion for the demons in Barthas. There was even a school called the Political Academy of the 9 Levels of Hell that provided education services for young demons who wanted to learn all kinds of methods to seize power. The dragon descendant named Murano Chow Fong kindly accepted the gift of a legend-ranked blue dragon. Then, he patted his sturdy chest and expressed that he would arrange for low-intensity battlefields so that the young blue dragons would have time to get used to bloody battles. Murano's attitude was much more enthusiastic than his previous businesslike attitude. The legendary Megalosaurus nodded in satisfaction. It spread its wings and flew towards the skull pillar in the center of the huge military camp. As the saying goes, it's easier to get things done when you have connections in the court, and as the saying goes, gifts blind the eyes. After receiving the benefits from Sarota, the dragon descendant did his best to choose a few mercenary camps that were remote enough for the young blue dragons to settle down. The intensity here is really low, Quith said. After witnessing the massive main battle camp, he could not bring himself to call this fenced-in place a camp. But if we're unlucky, when the projection of the abyssal plane overlaps with Avernus in a few days, the demon army will appear here. If the main battle does not attract the attention of the demons, I'm afraid this place will become very dangerous. Keys did not stay with the other young blue dragons. In fact, for Bader's mercenary camp, if there were more than 2 Megalosaurus stationed together, they might be targeted by the abyssal demon army. It would be safer to stay with the main battle army. Before going to the mercenary camp, Keys had asked the adult blue dragon to conscript the 3 ogre brothers to go with him. The reason was simple. After all, among all the creatures he knew, only the 3 ogre brothers could be called honest, and their combat ability was above average. On the battlefield, at least they could take care of each other. Not to mention saving their own lives at the critical moment, at least they would not stab each other in the back like the Batsu devil. In addition to taking away his companions, he also used some of his accumulated wealth to exchange for some excellent protective equipment and weapons for himself and the 3 of them. Keys did not intend to fight in the form of an underage megalosaurus. That would definitely attract the attention of the demon army and at the same time, remind them that this is a soft persimmon. Come and get it. Just like that, Bru, who always had ideas, Palu, who always had potions, Nalu, who always had strength, and Keys, who had disguised himself as a human teenager, walked into the simple mercenary camp. Stop, you bumpkins from the material plane. As soon as they walked into the camp, 2 barbed demon guards with serrated machetes stopped Keys and the rest. Show me your transfer order, or you will be treated as trespassers and killed. Keys showed the transfer order scroll given by Murano Chow Fong to the 2 guards. The group of people who wanted to enter the camp were not allowed to pass. One of the barbed demons signaled to its companion with its eyes. Keys noticed the small movements of the demons. It turned out that the 2 evil creatures were actually thinking about the armor Keys was wearing. They signaled to their companion that they wanted to launch a surprise attack and kill Keys to obtain the spoils of war. As for the few strong ogres around Keys, they believed that even if they were in the same group, they would not stand up for Keys. With the philosophy of the Batsu people, it was impossible for the barbed demons to protect or avenge their companions. Moreover, as long as they killed the human teenager who held the transfer order, they could frame the ogres and summon the other guards in the camp to kill the 3 ogre murderers and maintain order in the camp. It had to be said that this was indeed very Batoan, very demonic. A crime that has not been caught is not a crime. After seeing through the trick of the 2 barbed demons, Keys did not hesitate to unsheath his newly purchased sword enchanted with the sharpening spell. With the strength and agility of the Megalosaurus, the sharp sword accurately pierced the heart of the barbed demon, who signaled its companion to attack even though it had not systematically learned any combat skills. At the same time, the ogre shaman acted almost as quickly as Keys' decisive attack. The strong acid shot out from the troll's skull staff accurately into the mouth of the other barbed demon, who wanted to call for more guards after its companion was killed. Demons were not completely immune to acid damage like demons. Their acid resistance was only effective on the surface of their skin. The strong acid that was poured into its body through its throat not only made it lose its ability to scream, but also made the barbed demon experience a pain worse than death. Palu, the creatures in this place are really tough. They did not turn into pus after being soaked in your acid. Look, they can still struggle. The ogre gourmet Blue took out his whaling harpoon. Although Keys had given the ogres some new weapons in the camp, they were still used to using their old weapons. Let's try the barbecued meat soaked in acid. I've heard of a saying that acid can stimulate the taste of food, but I couldn't find any meat that could withstand the acid you created. The ogre gourmet said excitedly. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Country Bumpkin is a colloquial language set in the D&D system. Later on, perhaps due to the mixing of races in Sigil City, this term was also adopted by other non-material creatures. After verifying the letter of appointment and the transfer order, the acting commander of the chain demon, Kuruzu, seemed to have changed his expression. He no longer cared about the 2 dead barbed demon guards lying on the ground, as if it was another creature that had roared loudly just now. In order to please the new supervisor, he even flattered him in the common human language of the material plane, which he was not very familiar with. Obviously, his wisdom and power could not see through Keys's true form. "Mr. Keyes, I'm very happy about your arrival. The supervisor system is the embodiment of good order in the 9 hells. This is definitely a good idea that only the big shots of the upper class could come up with." The chain demon, Kuruzu, carefully flattered him while secretly picking up the chain that he had just pulled out of his body. The chain of a chain demon was also a part of their body. Not only was it a weapon that they could use like an arm, but it also had the ability to regenerate like a demon's body. A broken chain could be reconnected and could be used again. Following the chain demon into the camp, Keyes knew why the chain demon flattered him so much. For the demon's class status was equivalent to power. In order to get rid of the word acting hanging above his head and become the real commander of this camp in the legal sense, Keyes, as the supervisor, had to give a fairly positive evaluation in the report after the war. As a mercenary camp from another plane, Keyes only found about 100 barbed demons as standing guards to maintain order in the camp. An army of this scale was not weak in the material plane. According to Keyes's estimation, each barbed demon had the power to defeat 3 or 4 of the Desert Elves' supreme warriors that he had met not long ago. But if the battlefield was a bloody one, such an army would not have the slightest deterrence. Perhaps there was no need for the higher demons. A few stronger intermediate demons could slaughter these barbed demons. Seeing Keyes' slightly frown, the chain demon hurriedly said, "Don't worry, Sir Supervisor. This is a relatively remote war zone, and it will be relatively safe after the bloody battle begins. Also, from now until the war begins, there will be mercenaries from other planes stationed in this camp according to the orders. When the time comes, the barracks here will be filled with all kinds of soldiers. Under my command, and of course under your careful evaluation and wise advice, those who work for the will of Bator will become qualified cannon fodder." When the chained demon mentioned Bator and the bloody battle, even his eyes that were wrapped in chains showed a proud look. Indeed, in terms of the potential of war, Bator only had 9 levels, and no one could figure out how many levels there were in the abyss. But even with such a huge difference in the potential of war, the demons still had a certain advantage in this war that had lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. The most obvious example was that Avernus, as the bridgehead of the bloody Battle of Bator, had never been occupied by the demons. The skull pillars made of demon skulls still stood tall, and the demons had successfully occupied some planes of the abyss more than once, pulling these planes from chaos into the camp of order. If not for the terrifying will of the abyss, some powerful demon princes and demon lords would have personally taken part in the bloody battle, and the demons would have suffered even greater setbacks in the bloody battle. In terms of the strength of the army, although the demons were powerful, they were chaotic. If not for the control of spells, even demon lords would not be able to fully control their armies. Bator's army had strict division of labor and strict discipline. Even though they were equally evil and loved to use schemes to fight among themselves, under the rules of order, the entire Bartholomew's 9 hells was like a seamless war machine. Everything was running for the ultimate goal of achieving victory in the bloody battle. In terms of the ability to mobilize war, although the abyss had countless levels and could mobilize a despairing number of Tana demons, the cunning and scheming upper-class demons had attracted supporters from all corners of the multiverse for Bator through persuasion, deception, and trade. In every bloody battle, there would be an equally shocking number of mercenaries from other planes joining the demons' camp, fighting for the 9 prisons of Bator. You have to trust my judgment on this point. Even the lying Batsu devil will give an honest answer on which side's army is better in the bloody battle. The chained demon's arm wrapped around the chains slapped his chest, and the chains clanged against each other. Keyes could not refute the chained demon's words based on the pride of his race. What he said was indeed part of the truth. After inspecting the entire camp, he found that although it was simple and crude, some basic facilities and supplies, including a workshop for forging weapons, food and drinking water for the mercenaries from other dimensions, were already in place. Although it was inevitable that there were signs of embezzlement, it could still be said that they were well prepared. Chapter 29. Through this patrol, Keyes had grasped some basic information about the camp. At present, there were only a few mercenaries from the other plane in the camp. They gathered together like a group of thugs who had been tricked into coming to Bot-Or to look for opportunities from an unknown plane. In addition to the barbed demon guards, there was also a hellhound raised by a chain demon in charge of patrolling the campsite. In addition, there were thousands of bloated demon cannon fodder in captivity in the corner of the campsite. They were a type of demon that was punished and tortured until they became blind, deaf, and stupid because of their mistakes. The other Batsu habitually called them lowly demons. All of the above mentioned were all the forces in the camp that could be put into battle at present, other than the chain demon commander and Keyes' group. Although the chain demon had repeatedly promised that the camp would be filled with mercenaries from other planes before the bloodshed began, and the overall strength of the camp would be greatly improved. But how could the demon's words be trusted? Walking to the well-prepared resting area, Keyes immediately dismissed the barbed demon guards that the chain demon had arranged to serve as his army supervisor. He then called the 3 ogre brothers into his tent. The tent was not tall enough, and the ogres did not know how to shapeshift, so they could only sit cross-legged on the ground. Fortunately, the tent was big enough that it was not crowded when the 3 ogres sat together. Seeing that they were seated, Keyes cast an anti-detection spell to ensure that no one was eavesdropping. After that, he also sat cross-legged on the ground. Although we have not known each other for long, I believe that you are trustworthy enough. Keyes paused for a moment to organize his words. In fact, you may have more or less heard about the cruelty of the upcoming war. To be honest, if the dragon nest was not bound by the contract, I would not want to be involved in this war at all. On this point, I want to hide it, although it may be a little cowardly and dishonorable. Looking around at the 3 ogre brothers who were quietly listening to him, Keyes continued. I hope that I can hold on for 2 years until I can freely withdraw from the war and return to my original world alive. Of course, this requires some luck. However, I believe that the best way to achieve this goal is to work hard to obtain more information, learn faster to improve my strength, and find some trustworthy companions. Keyes stretched out his clenched fist. This was the gesture that the gladiators in the Ash world used to bless each other before a life-and-death battle. I hope I can get this honor. Let's help each other. If the enemy dies, I will live. Fight to the end. The 479th level of the bottomless abyss was called Acid Fog Canyon by the Thanner-Re demons. The atmosphere here was an acidic mist that was constantly being replenished by the volcanic eruptions. The volcanic eruptions left behind a scene of utter destruction. A huge winding canyon cut through the vast land of this plain. Originally, this level was ruled by a Bela lord named Tardheim, but later his position as a demon lord was overthrown by another powerful demon. The reason he was subverted was because he tried to grasp power that was far beyond his reach. As an evil demon, it was in their nature to seek greater power. There was nothing wrong with it. However, in order to seize power, Tardheim boldly and recklessly used the remains of the Obilus demon lord that he had found in an unknown era and carried out a crazy fusion experiment with the weak abyssal worms that had all the genetic information of the Thanner-Re demons. The purpose of the experiment was to create a brand new creature with the characteristics of 2 demons. If Tardheim succeeded, then he would become a powerful demon lord with the strength of the demon creator, and even have the opportunity to seek the supreme honor of the demons, the title of Demon Prince. For the sake of this grand goal, the Flame Demon Lord Baylor had spent almost all of his wealth. In order to focus on the experiment, he even gave up a demon order that he had set up for countless years in the material plane. No matter where, even in the abyss, as long as he persevered, he would always gain something. This difficult experiment that lasted hundreds of years finally succeeded, but it was only the experiment itself that succeeded. Tardheim had suffered the biggest failure since his birth. No one knew the exact reason for the failure, but the most widespread theory was that Tardheim was careless and chose the wrong experimental material. An evil spellcaster with the memories of his previous life fell into the abyss and became an abyssal worm. After successfully combining with the remains of the Obilus demon lord, he became a brand new demon. It was undeniable that the design of this experiment was ingenious, and the results were very satisfactory. This experimental creation that Tardheim had high hopes for was powerful enough and had a certain amount of wisdom. However, perhaps it was a little too powerful. This brand new demon had enough strength to rival its creator as soon as it appeared. All the means that Tardheim had carefully prepared to enslave the experimental creation failed. The gigantic worm defeated and devoured its creator, and built its own lair above the castle that once belonged to the demon lord. The demonic creation became the new demon lord of the 479th abyssal level at an unimaginable speed. The title of Worm Tyrant was quickly learned by other demons in the abyss. As the material to synthesize this beast, the predecessor of the abyssal worm, the evil spellcaster might have just been a lousy mage when he was alive. But after experiencing Tardheim's experiment, he, if he could still be called himself, had a powerful strength that he could never hope to achieve when he was alive when the experiment was successful. The worm tyrant had tough muscles similar to the Obilus demon, and these muscles formed its huge body that stretched like a mountain ridge. This body not only contained powerful physical strength that would shock any demon, but also stored amazing magic power in every part of the body, allowing this behemoth to rely on its own instincts to cast spells like a sorcerer. The concept of spell slots that restricted the continuous destructive power of a spellcaster was meaningless to such an existence. There was no need for any preparation. As long as the worm tyrant was willing, the frenzied flood of spells could easily tear apart any creature that dared to face it. This new demon lord quickly adapted to its new life as a demon, and gradually adapted to the laws of the abyss according to the path of a demon's development. Perhaps it was the legacy of its birth experiment, but this beast with some intelligence easily completed what its creator had spent hundreds of years to complete, creating a new demon race. Of course, this creation was not like the ambitious Tardheim, who wanted to create a new species out of thin air. The worm tyrant's creation was simple and crude, but more efficient. It used its own flesh and blood to easily reproduce acid mist worms that covered the entire floor. The size of these first worms was far from comparable to their creator, and they could only grow to a few feet long. But these little things had amazing vitality. The acid mist worms relied on the acid mist that covered the entire floor to survive. By breathing in the sulfur-rich acid gas, and then excreting the gas that was suitable for other creatures to breathe after digestion, the shocking number of worms even changed the environment of the entire floor. Even though the underground volcanoes were constantly spewing out new acidic gas, the acidic mist still shrouded the entire plain. However, the concentrated acid flowing in the rivers had been greatly diluted, and some resilient plants had begun to cover the barren land. These changes made this floor begin to become livable. Many various Tana, Re, and other creatures migrated from other floors of the abyss to the transformed 479th floor of the abyss, the original Acid Mist Canyon. Originally, it was impossible for the weak Tana Re demons to enjoy the fat abyssal worms endlessly like the higher demons, but the Tana Re who migrated to this floor found a substitute food that tasted very similar to the abyssal worms, the acid mist worms. This discovery made them ecstatic, so more demons began to try to sneak into this place that was like a paradise to them. However, the roles of the prey and the hunter would sometimes change. The tyrant worm used its own flesh and blood to create a new demon race that covered the entire floor. It was not intended to be a free meal for other Tana Re. As more and more Tana Re species appeared on this floor, demons gradually began to become food for the worms, and the two levels of the food chain were quickly reversed. It was then that the stowaways realized that the acid mist canyon was not a free meal, but a huge trap. As the fresh Tana Re-demons were preyed on and devoured by the acid mist worms, these new Tana Re-demons with certain demon worm characteristics began to self-evolve. In the end, two evolved forms were stably inherited: the sky-burning walker and the cataclysmic worm. The sky-burning walker was a kind of huge acid mist worm. The largest size could grow to be comparable to an adult megalosaurus. It had a structure similar to an air sac in its body that could breathe in air and adjust the density of its body to achieve flight. It could also spray compressed gas around through the large and small pores on its body to change direction and move at high speed. The gas that the sky-burning walker sprayed out was extremely hot and flammable. It would form a layer of flame shield around its body that was always burning. Usually, they looked like they were floating in the air, like a boat on fire floating on the sea. Once they found their prey, they would pounce on it like a rocket. The target that they targeted would not only have to face a fierce collision comparable to a siege hammer, but also suffer the double torture of strong acid and flames. The evolutionary path of the cataclysmic worm was the opposite of the sky-burning walker. It abandoned the evolutionary path of individual strength. By giving up the individual, the worms formed a strange aggregated creature. Its body was made up of thousands of worms, and it did not have a fixed form. It was constantly dripping strong acid. The breeding of the cataclysmic worm was somewhat accidental. At first, only a small number of acid mist worms stubbornly parasitized the bodies of some Tana Re. They consumed the host's body to survive and reproduce. This behavior of damaging the host's body would cause the host to gradually weaken, making it easier for other acid mist worms to capture and parasitize. If the host's will was strong enough, it was possible that they would only be corrupted by the worms instead of being completely digested. The corrupted will would condense into the body invaded by the worms and assemble into a new cataclysmic worm. Every cataclysmic worm that was born could randomly retain some of the host's abilities when they were alive. Every sky-burning walker and the cataclysmic worm was the favored offspring of the tyrant worm. They were the demon lord's most trusted kin and the creatures at the top of the food chain in the acid mist canyon. The other Tana Re-demons could only carefully survive under the rule of the two species in this terrifying dimension that was originally thought to be a cafeteria, but was eventually proven to be a kitchen. In fact, unless the Tana Re who came to this dimension willingly or involuntarily became parasitized by the worms, they would immediately be devoured by the swarm of worms. The ancient will of the abyss, which had the greatest tolerance for chaos and evil, accepted these two new higher demons. In a sense, they had indeed strengthened the power of the abyss, and the tyrant worm, who had created these two powerful demons, was naturally rewarded by the abyss. Although the will of the abyss did not give it more power, it gave it another ability that it lacked: the ability to think. Ordinary demons did not need to think. The only thing they needed to worry about was how to survive in the abyss. But it was different for demon lords. These powerful demons not only had to face the covetous eyes of the lower demons under their rule, but also various malicious schemes from other demon lords in the abyss. Being able to think, being able to find loopholes, and being able to formulate more evil schemes was a compulsory course for a qualified demon lord. Before it had the wisdom to think, the tyrant worm was like a beast that had just awakened its intelligence. It fought with its instincts, created its kin with its instincts, and controlled powerful magic with its instincts. Its power was undeniable, but this power was too singular and too narrow to deal with more and more complex challenges. But everything was different after it gained the ability to think. First of all, it was not satisfied that it could only cast spells like a sorcerer. The primitive and rough magic power could not exert its full strength. After careful consideration, it came up with a solution to this problem. The tyrant worm had recruited many creatures with exquisite spellcasting skills to its kingdom through deceit, bluffing, and other means. It humbly asked these teachers for knowledge that could improve its spellcasting ability using the mind language. In order to obtain precious knowledge, the tyrant worm became extremely generous. It almost agreed to these powerful spellcasters' requests. It regarded them as an investment. Investment required a return, and the demon lord's investment was an excess return. After the tyrant worm had obtained enough knowledge, and even went further than all of its teachers on the path of magic, this greedy worm did not hesitate to take back its previous investment. Just like how it treated Tardheim, who created it, it ruthlessly devoured the spellcasters that it had previously treated as its guests. Among them were human archmages, fairy kings, and some other demons. But among them, the ones that brought it the most benefits were all kinds of evil dragons that were born as powerful magic creatures. Because it had devoured too many Megalosaurus, its powerful body even evolved again. Its circular body grew scales on the surface of its body, and the originally sticky and fat tongue in its huge mouth full of barbed teeth twisted, growing a huge dragon head and many appendages. It named it Dragon's Subbody. Relying on the dragon's subbody, the tyrant worm had the ability to communicate, which made it easier for it to convey more and more complex evil plans. With the dragon's subbody, it could use some spells that originally required language and special gestures without hindrance. The tyrant worm was very happy to see this change. It even gave the dragon's subbody a unique name. In honor of the tyrant worm's creator, it named it Hemtar. P.S. Spell slot. This is a special setting of the game. Unlike many other games where the mage profession has a mana bar, the number of spells a mage can cast is strictly limited. Every day, they need to rely on 8 hours of sleep to recollect the spells they will use the next day. Only a small number of particularly strong or special existences can be exempted from this rule. This setting is, firstly, to balance the mage and other classes. Secondly, it is convenient for players to calculate damage when running a team. After all, the human brain is not a computer. The specific rules are more complicated. There are some differences in each version, so I won't introduce it. Those who are interested can search for it yourself. It is quite interesting. Chapter 30. Chain Demon's guarantee was confirmed, and in a way, it proved that the demon's guarantee was still valid. On the second day after Keys and the rest settled into the mercenary camp, there were more soldiers and military supplies being escorted by the demon army. However, there weren't many who could be called warriors. Fortunately, this was mainly a mercenary camp. It wasn't like the other small Batsu camps, where groups of disgusting imps with constantly melting human forms were arranged into groups. There's not a single one who can fight. Neru the ogre walked into Keys's tent and sat cross-legged on the ground. He began to grumble. The newcomers are just a bunch of punks who don't know their own strength. They're still clamoring for the demons to see their powerful martial arts. Haha. His brother, the ogre voodoo doctor, handed him a freshly made energy ointment. The ointment had the miraculous effect of calming the temper of otherworldly creatures in Batsu. Neru, you have to learn to control your anger. Only when your anger explodes in battle can you hurt the enemy and not your own people. The new soldiers aren't that great, but the new weapons are still promising. Brew, who had gone to check the new military supplies with Keys, opened the tent. He was holding some samples in his hands and under his arms. The reason he opened the tent was to allow Quess, who was dragging more wooden boxes, to enter the tent smoothly. Phew! The blue dragon, who was in his youth form, seemed to be gasping for breath. It was a little strenuous for him to drag the heavy boxes. When Keys entered the tent, Brew put down the curtain and hurriedly threw the things he was responsible for to the ground. The muffled sound and the marks on the ground showed that the ogre was not slacking off. The items he brought were also very heavy. What kind of weapons are these? They look like battering rams. But even if they're made of bronze, they're a little small. Nera was obsessed with all kinds of weapons. When he heard that they were new weapons, he could not help but want to study them. He curiously picked up the new weapons that Brue had thrown to the ground. He thought it was some kind of bronze battering ram, but the cylinder was hollow in the middle. These are copper cannons. Keyes did not use the name Infernal Roar given to him by the demonic quartermaster who gave him the weapons. Instead, he used a more concise and direct way to call them. These are the ordnance prepared by the demons to deal with the charge of the demon minions. Seeing that Nalu was about to wave the copper cannon in his hand, Quest directly opened the lid of a few wooden boxes that he had dragged over, revealing some neatly stacked cannonballs that were buffered by hay. Bronze cannons can't be used by waving them around. They have to rely on the explosion of gunpowder to fire the cannonballs. Only then can they cause damage. Brue stopped his brother, who was about to tear down the tent, and explained, "Keyes said that this thing is good stuff. If it's used properly, the power of each shell fired will be similar to my bursting fireball." In fact, the demons had invented this weapon because of its explosive fire damage. Most of the demons in the Abyss Tower were almost immune to electric shock and poison damage. Fire, strong acid, and cold could effectively kill the weaker low-level demons. In Avernus, the main raw materials of gunpowder were sulfur and saltpeter, and the production cost was extremely low. Most of the Batsu Devil were not afraid of fire damage, so this type of cannon was widely used in the front line of the Blood Station. The demons used this type of cannon very conveniently. They only needed 2 ordinary barbed demons. One was responsible for shouldering and aiming, while the other assisted in changing the ammunition and firing. As long as the demons did not charge in front of them, the copper cannons could continuously fire and inflict heavy damage to the enemy's minions. As for the damage caused by the overheating of the barrel and the explosion of the barrel, it was just a number on the battle damage report. No Batsu commander was particularly concerned. After continuously firing 20 shells, on average, 1 shot every 30 breaths, the barrel of the copper cannon will overheat and need to be cooled down. Seeing such a familiar killing weapon, Quest was naturally not prepared to use it casually like the demons. He completely relied on numbers to annihilate the enemy. Of course, the dozens of copper cannons in the camp could not form a large-scale attack in a bloody battle like this. Whether it was out of the nature of his race or out of memory of the world in his memory, Keyes was prepared to experiment with this type of weapon to find a more effective way of attacking. "I don't think we can use the coordination of infantry and cannons. The soldiers in this camp definitely don't have that kind of military literacy. This caliber of cannon is fine against the minions, but against the greater demons who can teleport, I'm afraid it's useless. I have to think of a way to focus fire when they're not paying attention." As Keyes pondered these questions, he wrote down some of the parameters and problems he had just tested on a piece of paper made from the skin of an unknown creature. Weapon name: Copper Cannon, Purgatory Roar. Parameter description: this is a long-range attack weapon that can fire explosive shells as a means of damage. It can be fired at a 45-degree angle and can fire at a maximum range. The furthest attack range is about 4,000 feet, 1,300 meters. It can take 3 to 4 rounds of effective fire from the enemy. It requires the cooperation of infantry to resist the impact in order to achieve continuous firepower. Each cannon can fire 10 times in a row and needs to cool down. Damage description: the shell can cause both kinetic and fire damage to the enemy. Under Nera's strong request, Keyes wrote down some of the weapon's parameters in the way he was used to. After seeing this new weapon, the ogre blacksmith seemed to have the idea of writing a guide to ogre weapons, like his brother. Unfortunately, he did not know how to write, so he could only ask Keyes to help him record the results of the experiment. He was responsible for moving the copper cannon and ammunition from Keyes' tent to the outside of the camp in exchange for the experiment. "Boss, those idiots and that kid just used the weapons the demons gave us. Those demons were reluctant to give us these things. They're not weak." Before he could finish, the gang leader waved his hand and interrupted the bandit's report and his jaw. As the gangster leader of the Broom Eyebrows bandit group, Dalton hated it when people spat on him when talking to him. Perhaps this subordinate was too excited and forgot about this, so he was slapped in the face. When the other members saw the tragic fate of their companions, they secretly reminded themselves not to make the same mistake. Seeing that his subordinates were afraid of him because of his tyranny, Broom Eyebrows, Dalton was very satisfied. Seems like it's better to be a little more ruthless. Since these bastards came here, they seem to have forgotten their F***king etiquette. Dalton habitually raised his broom eyebrows. Dalton had always been good at these little tricks to control villains. These tricks could be said to be the capital that made him rich. Ever since he obtained the capital that allowed him to prosper from the demon-like merchant who was perhaps a demon in disguise, Dalton's path in the underworld of Soft Maple City had never been smoother. Bandit gangs came to him one after another, and even the nobles in the city had to show him respect. This good life lasted until the merchant who gave Dalton the capital came to ask for a return. Originally, he wanted to do what he did countless times, use boundless promises in exchange for other people's precious wealth. When the victims came to their senses and came to ask for payment, he would tear up the agreement and beat them up or throw them directly into the sewers to feed the rats. However, Dalton miscalculated. He only showed a slight sign of wanting to break the agreement in front of the demon merchant, and his skin was torn apart by the flames. After using up some magic amulets that he had accumulated over the years to buy, he was lucky enough to survive. He wanted to report this heresy to the divine priest who preached in the city. Once again, he miscalculated. Before he could finish exaggerating the horror and evilness of the demons, the priest roared, "The villains who make deals with the demons need to be completely purified." At that moment, it was as if the priests had forgotten any words related to salvation in their doctrines that they often preached. After killing the priest who roared to purify him, Dalton, who had no place in the world, had no choice but to obey the agreement and come to this damned place called Avernus to start his life in Bardo. However, due to the punishment for breaking the agreement, as soon as he walked out of the portal of Avernus, he was thrown to the mercenary recruitment office by the demon merchant. Then, he was immediately arranged to participate in the latest bloody battle. To be honest, when he first came to Bardo a few days ago, seeing all kinds of demons on the streets and avoiding the deadly fireballs that fell from the sky, Dalton and his subordinates were almost scared to death. One had to know that before they came to this damned place, in Soft Maple City, even a child knew that the most unyielding person in the city was not the city lord who only knew how to give orders, but Dalton, the boss of all the gang bosses. But in fact, if he knew what bloody battle really meant, he would not have been scared to death. "Little bastards, come with me. Let's meet the guys who got the new weapons." It was not that Dalton did not listen to the report of the unlucky man just now. In fact, it was he who ordered people to investigate Keyes and his party. This was also one of the many tricks that Dalton had mastered, learned to weigh the weight of others before making a plan. He tidied up his open-necked shirt, which was wrapped around his body due to his sweat, and put on the iconic bowler hat of the Broom Eyebrows. Dalton stood up from the stone stool and stomped his feet as if he wanted to shake off the hell soil that had soaked his shoes. His rosaceous nose opened and closed slightly, and he muttered in a cunning and cruel voice, "This damned place makes my nose uncomfortable. Everywhere is uncomfortable." Keyes and the ogres, who had just finished testing the so-called Hellscream outside the mercenary camp, happened to meet the Broom Eyebrows who wanted to weigh their weight. Chapter 31. What are these little guys talking about? Blue, the ogre who stood beside Keyes, asked the ogre who was blocking their way. He had yet to master the spell language proficiency. Indeed, after coming to Bador, Keys had force-fed him some infernal language, but the little guys in front of him obviously did not speak the common language of the underworld. Stop, ogre idiots, and that country boy who came out of nowhere. The one who shouted was the big voice of the Broom Brows gang. His name was Gary or Gary, but Boss Dalton needed someone with such a strong voice to convey what he wanted to say. I heard that the demons gave you something new. Show it to the Broom Brows gang. The big voice rubbed his hands as if he was about to beat someone up. Damn it, can't you understand human language? Hey, I'm talking to you, country bumpkin. The loud voice that he was most proud of did not seem to attract the attention of the ogres. The big voice seemed to be a little angry. He raised his right hand and pointed at Keys, who was standing behind the ogres. It seemed like he was being treated as a pushover. Although the blue dragon's body had developed quickly enough, he could still change his body shape according to his age using magic. Although he was taller and stronger than the average human teenager, he looked just like a teenager to others. Quest looked at the mercenaries who were pointing at him and yelling at him in a language he couldn't understand. He didn't even need to waste his mana to cast language proficiency on himself. Just by looking at their appearance and cowardice, he could tell that these people were some low-level villains from other planes. Ignore them. Let's go, Keys added in his heart. They were just cannon fodder anyway. He signaled the ogres to return to the camp. The acting commander of the Chain Ogre had just sent a barbed ogre guard to inform them that a group of decent mercenaries had been sent to the camp. He wanted to ask Keys to give him some advice on how to deploy the troop. This kid really came from a remote village. He's been with the ogres for so long that he can't even understand human speech. How dare you ignore us? The bandits had always thought that Keys was the human youth that the three ogres had captured to act as their interpreter or food storage. Not long ago, they had even seen him following behind an ogre, dragging a heavy box containing new weapons across half of the camp. There was never a shortage of reckless thugs in any gang of thugs. These reckless thugs always exploded completely at the beginning of their anger. They had no habit of accumulating anger, and they always lacked a grasp of the actual situation they were in. After the ogre and the blue dragon ignored Broom Eyebrows and his gang's provocation, a few of them jumped out from the group of self-proclaimed heroes. To be honest, if they were still in Soft Maple City, Broom Brows, Dalton would have cheered for these little bastards. Their decisive moves often showed their decisiveness, striking fear into the hearts of their enemies before the battle even started. But it was different now. This was the demon's lair. Who knew if the seemingly harmless appearance was actually a demon's disguise? Dalton only wanted to weigh the weight of the only human-like creature in the camp. He reckoned that the creature had some weight to it, since it was able to survive in this godforsaken place. Only after evaluating the feasibility of the plan, if possible, would he be prepared to do what he did to the garrison captain under the Soft Maple City's city lord. He would use bribery, fraud, threats, and other means to put him into his bag so that he could use him at any time. This shitty place is really strange. Those little bastards who couldn't even squeeze an egg out of them have become so strong-willed in this place. Damned idiots, messing up my plan. Dalton was so angry that he almost went crazy, but he did not want his subordinates to see his weakness. He did not know what to do for a moment. The first one to attack was not Broom Eyebrows, who had been loudly provoking them at the beginning. Instead, it was an inconspicuous burglar. This burglar, who was only used to stealing in the dark, was now as fierce as a warrior. He first hid in the shadow behind Broom Eyebrows, and threw his net at Keys and the others. The burglar purposely added some extra material to the net. The net, which was originally used to steal pet dogs, was now covered with sharp iron shards. After throwing the net, the burglar jumped out of the group with a butcher's knife and went straight for his target. At the same time, he was imagining the cruel scene of his knife stabbing into the ignorant country bumpkin's body wrapped in his bramble net. Don't stab at those vital spots. Maybe Broom Eyebrows still has a use for that kid, the burglar reminded himself. The other gang members could not help but cheer for the burglar for these two beautiful consecutive attacks. For a moment, including Broom Eyebrows, a few other villains with quick reactions rushed forward with machetes, axes and other weapons in their hand. Obviously, they did not want the burglar to monopolize the glory and wanted to get a share of the loot. Noticing the other villains who wanted to steal his kill, the burglar could not help but curse in his heart. These bastards need to be taught a lesson. Keys also had the same thought. These guys, who were brought here by demons from an unknown material plane to be cannon fodder, were really ignorant and fearless. Even the Batsu Devil, who was much stronger than them, had to follow the rules of hell and accumulate merits little by little to be promoted. Obey the orders of the superior was Batsu's iron law. No demon in the camp dared to directly attack his superior. If they wanted to die, it would be better to fight a bailer alone than to do this stupid thing. A few Barbed Eyebrows, who were originally standing in the distance and watching these country bumpkins argue with each other, saw that the mercenaries dared to draw their knives. They roared angrily and rushed over like clockwork. The low-level cannon fodder wanted to attack the combat staff officer in the camp. In their eyes, Keys, the combat staff officer, was also a country bumpkin from the material plane. This was simply an unforgivable act of rebellion. If their ambush had succeeded, these devil guards would have been sent to the military court for their negligence. Keys reacted faster than the Barbed Eyebrows. The Blue Dragon, who had excellent dynamic vision, dodged the net when it flew over. Without using any magic ability, Keys took out the wailing, double-barreled shotgun and jumped in front of the burglar, who was still launching a jump attack. With an imperceptible smile on his face, Keys muttered in a low voice, "If I shoot at close range, I won't be able to miss the target." With a bang, the fire and metal shrapnel almost hit the burglar's head at the same time. There was no scream because the victim's head disappeared in an instant, leaving only the twitching body that fell back under the kinetic force. The white and blood-red shrapnel burst out of the burglar's head and splashed on the other villains who wanted to snatch the head. The eyeball-sized shrapnel was stuck in Loud Voice's mouth. After he struggled to vomit for a while and coughed out the disgusting thing, he found that the shrapnel was actually the burglar's eyeball. But it was a blessing in disguise. When he vomited, he rushed much slower and fell behind one of his companions, so he dodged the second shot from the wailing. But the one who rushed in front of him was not so lucky. The shrapnel tore through the light rattan armor the thug wore like a piece of paper and then drilled out from his back. A large hole that almost split him in half appeared on the body of the attacker. Clean and efficient. Keys was satisfied with his shooting this time. Imitating the cowboy's action of putting away the gun, he gently blew at the muzzle that was emitting gunpowder smoke before putting away the wailing. At this time, the Barbed Demon Guards had already rushed over and chopped the remaining villains who dared to attack into pieces with their big knives as if they were vegetables. In front of the 6-feet-tall Hell's minions, these brave men of soft Maple City were as weak as children. "You bunch of filthy bastards, you actually dare to attack the battle staff officer of the camp. You are simply lawless." A captain of the Barbed Demon Guards spat out sparks of spittle while cursing this group of villains in infernal language. Even more barbed demons rushed over from afar and surrounded this group of people, but they did not rashly launch an attack. Chapter 32. Broom Eyebrows. What should we do?" a lackey asked his boss as he gripped his weapon. Surrounded by more than a dozen barbed fiend guards, he appeared to be very nervous, his voice even trembling. Ignoring his subordinate's question, Dalton himself was also very terrified. Fight? Definitely not. Even if he used all his trump cards and encouraged his lackeys to fight for him for a while, he probably would not be able to escape from the base of these demons. Beg for mercy? The problem was that there was no language barrier, and there was no way to communicate at all. Hell, Wasn't the demon merchant who forced him to come to this godforsaken place very eloquent? Why was there no one here who could speak? The demon leading the charge only knew how to roar. A dozen barbed fiend guards had suppressed more than 100 members of the gang, but they did not attack. Instead, they kept cursing with filthy infernal words. Keyes knew very well that these guards had no intention of executing all the gang members now, as long as he, the combat staff officer of the camp in name, did not give the order. The reason why the barbed fiend guards did not hesitate to kill the gang that attacked them was because their rebellious behavior had violated the laws of hell, and they had to be severely punished. As for the remaining villains who did not have the time to act, they were the valuable assets of the camp. They would still be useful after the war broke out, even for low-tier bats. The barbed fiend guards were not stupid. If these mercenaries were all dead, when the bloody battle broke out, the order of their appearance by their superiors would probably be pushed forward. That chained man is here. The one who spoke was the ogre Neru. He was very interested in the chain of armor and weapons that grew from the body of the camp's acting commander, and had even given the chained fiend an interesting nickname, Chained Man. "Oh my, what's going on?" The acting commander of the chained fiend guards in the camp ran over, dragging a chain behind him as he shouted, "Who's so bold to rebel in my camp?" Running to Keyes' side, the chained fiend guard greeted Keyes warmly, asking if he was hurt. After getting a negative answer, he put on a "thank goodness you're not" expression. Of course, it was fake concern. After all, this was the Hell of Bot-Or, one of the places in the multiverse where power and authority were most closely matched. As the acting commander of the camp, he was confident that he could suppress all the other Batsu in the camp with his own strength. Since the one who came out of nowhere had the right to give him a score in the post-battle report, how could he be defeated by such a weak little bug? "You bunch of brainless retards. Our combat staff officer, Mr. Keyes, was almost assassinated because of your carelessness." As long as he could win the favor of this combat staff officer, the chances of him removing the word "acting" and being promoted to an official commander would be higher. As long as there was a chance to climb to a higher position, the devils would not easily give it up. In order to perform better, not only did the chained demon angrily curse the incompetence of the guards under him, but he also whipped them with the chains wrapped around his body. In Bot-Or, the subordinate demons were nothing more than numbers on the battle damage report that was being written or would be written in the future. This was not out of strictness or discipline, but a law of rearing beasts in the huge demonic coliseum of Bot-Or. If the subordinate demons were not ruthlessly oppressed, their nature of coveting the throne and daring to plot any evil schemes would bring disaster. The first victim would be their own demon commander in the chain that they were loyal to. Therefore, when the chain demon punished these barbed demon guards, it had no intention of holding back its strength. It had gone through countless similar harsh punishments to get to the position of acting commander, not to mention that it had a chance to show off its management ability in front of Keyes. In order to increase the punishment, spikes grew on the chains, and every whip would take away a small piece of flesh from the victim. But none of the barbed demons dared to resist or dodge the painful punishment. Anyway, the demons had a certain regenerative ability. Although the beating was painful, it would not cause death. Of course, this was only for the lower world creatures with good physique. If ordinary people were whipped by the vicious spiked chains, they would have been smashed into a pile of minced meat. "Hey, why are those demons fighting among themselves?" "Shut up, I'm not deaf." "It's the ears." The minions of the Broom Eyebrows gang were secretly shocked when they saw the chain demon beating up the barbed demon guards. They wondered if they would lose an arm or a leg if they were to be whipped like that. Keyes had no interest in watching the chain demon's performance. The battle was imminent. Perhaps in the next minute, multiple demons of Tana Re would appear in front of them through the overlapped plains. The young blue dragon was a practical child who could not wait to spend every minute and every second on preparing for the battle and improving its strength. It was all for the sake of what it had promised the three ogre brothers, to survive this bloody battle without any danger. Keys raised his hand and grabbed the wrist of the chain demon, who was waving the chain vigorously. The chain demon was obviously surprised by the strength of a human teenager like Keys. But then, the chain demon quickly hid its expression. It did not want to show such emotions in front of its subordinate. It would only make them doubt its ability and stir up more conspiracies against it. We're pressed for time. Perhaps we can let these people lead the assault team as punishment, Keys said concisely as he stared at the chain demon. The chain demon's acting commander put on a ferocious expression as if it was trying to curry favor with Hao-Rin. Of course, I have to admire your quick decision. I mean, it's a good idea to let these lowlifes do the rough work. That's right. After pleasing the person who was crucial to his promotion, the chain demon immediately turned his ugly face to the few guards he had just whipped. You lowly bastards, did you hear the chief of staff plead for you? Take these scum from the material plane away and keep an eye on them. When the camp is attacked for the first time, you'll lead the charge. If you're lucky, you might survive. Hee hee hee. You lowlifes. That was the first sentence Dalton and the others heard from the guards in the camp. After the chain demon gave the order, it then invited Keys to meet the new big shot. Only the barbed demon guards, who were casually sent to their deaths by the sinister consigliere and the harsh acting commander, were left to clean up the mess. These low-level demons, who were as ferocious as their superiors, finally made an exception and used spells that they were not very familiar with. And when they used the language proficiency spell, the casting material was the tongues of the villains from the Broom Brows gang. Perhaps it was because they rarely used this spell, or purely for the purpose of venting their anger, the barbed demon even cut off the tongues of dozens of people before it could successfully speak words that the other villains could understand. Anyway, the loss of tongues did not affect the use of cannon fodder. Chapter 33. Chain Demon used Purgatory, which had a strong accent and strict vocabulary, to introduce another group of people who came to the low-intensity battlefield to gain experience and slack off. A goblin in a strange outfit, a Sawajan whose gender was unknown, and a team of semi-constructed guards led by a golem leader were the members of this gold-plated group. Staff Officer Keys, allow me to introduce you. This is Mr. Raknaz Spanner. He is a recently naturalized noble duke of the foreign goblin kingdom who admires the great Bator civilization. Based on the large number of slave resources provided by this friendly kingdom for the construction of the first level of Bator, Avernus, and the recommendation of the Bator Diplomatic and Strategic Research Center, this gentleman will be a war observer and experience the test of a bloody battle up close. Chain Demon turned his head politely and said to the war observer, Raknaz Spanner, although there is a certain amount of danger as a war observer, I believe that you will be able to overcome it and learn the essence of Bator's war civilization in battle. Through Chain Demon's lengthy introduction, Keys had a preliminary understanding of this bloody battle observation team that was sent to Bator. What was unusual was that this team was led by a great noble from the Goblin Technological Empire, which was adjacent to the machinery realm. The entire team of well-equipped semi-constructed guards and the mechanical warrior leading them were the personal guards and guards of the Goblin noble. The last member of the team, the Sawajan whose gender was unknown, was an advanced sea priest who was captured by the goblins and used as a spellcaster. What an interesting combination, and I don't know what aesthetic style it is. This was Keys's first reaction. As the leader of the party, the goblin noble wore a form-fitting formal robe that resembled a suit. He also wore a pair of oiled leather pointy boots. The top of his head was shiny, and a pair of metal goggles were tied to his forehead with a belt. They looked like two small broken horns. He seemed to be able to understand the relatively obscure Infernal without any hindrance. When Chain Demon introduced him to Keys, he politely bowed slightly and placed his right hand on his chest. His other hand was holding a small folding umbrella made entirely of metal. The fireballs falling from the sky of Avernus fell on this umbrella like real rain, making a faint pop sound and then completely disappearing. Only occasionally, the runes inscribed on the metal umbrella would give off an almost undetectable flash. "That little thing is dressed in an interesting way," Blue the ogre, who was standing behind Kith, whispered to his brother in a muffled voice. He gestured with his thick fingers as if he was measuring the height of the goblin. When Nalu saw this, he gently patted his belly, but still let out a chuckle. "How dare you two filthy ogres mock the great Lord Riknaz?" The Sawajan spellcasters beside the goblin noble seemed to have been angered by the ogre's frivolous actions, and they let out a scolding. Keys recognized the voice of the Sawajan. It was a female Sawajan. As the Sawajan sea priestess scolded, she waved her hand and cast a spell-like ability unique to her race, Ghost Bite. A phantom of a soul shark's head appeared behind Blue the ogre. The shark's huge jaws suddenly closed, as if the phantom's sharp teeth had suddenly become real. "Be careful! Damn it!" A few different curses were mixed together. The huge shark's mouth did not bite the flesh on Blue's back. The ogre gourmet cast a spell just as the fangs were about to touch him. A special candy, similar to popping candy, was tossed into his mouth. In a flash, Blue's body was vaporized. The shark's sharp teeth bit the air and made a bang sound. It was very powerful. Blue's body turned into a cloud of smoke and floated backward. Although this form made him immune to physical attacks, he would suffer additional damage when he was attacked by magic. He had to retreat to a safe place and use the advantage of a spellcaster to cooperate with his brothers in battle. This was a tactic that he had practiced many times. Seeing their brothers being attacked, Neru and Paru were instantly enraged. The ogre blacksmith waved his huge ebony flail and charged forward. Witch-Doctor Paru cooperated with Keys, who had drawn his scimitar and was about to execute the decapitation tactic. The ogre blacksmith waved his troll skull staff, and an acid bullet flew close to the ground at a tricky angle towards the leader of the opposing team, Riknaz. "Stop!" With a furious roar, the camp's chain troll acting commander used his body to block Paru's acid bullet. He could not sit idly by and watch the battlefield observer arranged by his superiors be attacked. If the goblin noble was injured, the situation would be out of control. The chain troll could not bear such a huge burden. The acid bullet hit the chains wrapped around the chain troll's body. The metallic surface of the chains hissed as they were corroded. However, the rust on the surface acted as a barrier, effectively preventing further damage from the acid. As for the acid that seeped through the cracks of the chains and stuck to his skin, it could not harm the intermediate Batsu Devil, who had strong acid resistance. However, that was all the chain troll could do. He had wanted to restrain Keys, who had drawn his scimitar, but the young blue dragon had gradually adapted to his human form and had nimbly dodged the chain's interference. The chain troll only wanted to take control of the situation. Just as the chain troll was about to add a few more chains to complete its goal, the ogre Neru's charge interrupted its actions. The heavily armored ogre warrior was twice its height and 4 times its weight. The chain troll staggered from the impact. If it weren't for the heavy chains wrapped around its body, the impact would have sent it flying. The chain troll's violent nature was stirred up by the impact. The cunning creature had no intention of continuing to fight to the death with Keys, who it could not see through, and Neru, whose physique was far superior to that of an ordinary ogre. It chose to avoid the enemy's main force and strike at the enemy's weak points, treating Paru as its opponent. It seemed like the ogre liked to attack with acid, and it was difficult for acid to hurt it. As for the observer, the chain troll believed that as long as it captured the slightly skinny ogre voodoo doctor in front of it, these people would not kill the goblin so easily. The chain troll was quick to come up with a plan, but it had overlooked 2 problems. First, did the ogre voodoo doctor really only have acid attacks? The answer was no. Seeing the chain troll charge at him, Paru revealed a triumphant smile. He waved the troll's skull, and a large yellow fog enveloped the chain troll. When the chain troll charged out of the fog and carefully checked for any signs of poisoning or other negative effects, it realized that the yellow fog was a powerful adhesive. It was a voodoo spell the ogre voodoo doctor had invented himself, aerosol. The chains that had been as easy as waving an arm were now stuck together. The protective armor had become a large metal cocoon that trapped the chain troll. Additionally, the chain troll did not expect the combined attacks of the ogre warrior and keys to be nullified. Even the ogre, who was as heavy as an elephant, was cleverly neutralized by the leader of the goblin's guards, the golem warrior. Nera's flail and key's scimitar only made a few meaningless metallic clangs when they struck the golem. It was completely ineffective. The golem warrior was like a monk. Not only did it have an indestructible body, but it also cleverly nullified the attacks of the two warriors as it moved. The golem, which was no different from a normal human, seemed to have been equipped with a functional module that only heavy-armored golems would have: attack while defense. It only needed to occasionally throw a few jabs or slashes in between its simple defense to tire the two attackers out. Keys estimated that even if he transformed into a dragon or used magic, he might not be able to quickly finish off the powerful opponent in front of him. All of you, please stop. Mr. 21, please do not cause unnecessary friendly harm. The goblin noble looked at his golem friend with satisfaction. He had found and repaired this golem at the border between the Empire and the Machine Realm. Back then, even though Spanner, as the #1 ruling family of the Goblin Empire, had an almost unlimited supply of materials, and Ricknaz himself was one of the top scholars in the Empire in terms of science and technology. He was known as the spanner that moves gears. Even so, he had encountered great difficulties when repairing this severely damaged but extremely precise golem warrior. Fortunately, the golem awakened after completing part of the repair work. Through communication, it guided Ricknaz to complete the final repair work. During that time, the two of them formed a relationship that was like a teacher and also a friend. Golem number 21, who had long forgotten its original orders because of the severe damage, voluntarily accompanied Ricknaz. Usually, it acted as the captain of the guards, and when it came to scientific research, it was the goblin's research partner. Golem number 21 had an intelligent calculation ability that other constructs could not compare to. Through learning, it had mastered more than one combat skill of a combat profession. It even mastered some unique spell-like abilities. Gentlemen, please allow me to apologize first. Just now, my team member took the initiative to launch a rude attack with ill intentions. Ricknaz bowed a little more than before. Then, he glanced at number 21. The golem who received the signal said, "Order received, Sir Commander." With a voice that sounded like a synthesized electronic voice, the golem warrior quickly retreated from the battle. Keys stopped Neru, who wanted to chase after it. This golem's superb martial arts and the strange spell-like abilities that it would use from time to time showed that it was definitely a tough nut to crack. The warrior who retreated from the battle walked straight to the sea priest. The golem was only half the height of the Sawajin, but when he punched the shark-like monster's slightly light-colored abdomen, its waist bent almost 90 degrees. The female Sawajin who could not withstand such a blow let out a painful howl with a mouth full of sharp teeth. Blue blood flowed out of the corner of its mouth. The golem warrior's chest mechanically twisted, revealing a hole. Inside, there was a dark blue heart that was still beating with a few soft tubes inserted into it. The golem gently used its finger to touch the heart hidden in its body, and a weak electric current was released from its fingertip onto it. At this time, the Sawajin priest, who had fallen to the ground, was as if struck by lightning. Its whole body twitched, and its skin secreted a sticky liquid that looked like sweat. The goblin Ricknaz walked to the priest lying on the ground and looked down at the Sawajin in a condescending manner. "Madam, please stop your little tricks. The dagger in your hand and the plan to provoke a conflict just now will bring unnecessary trouble to me and my friends. As a captive, you have to fulfill your obligation to serve me for 50 years. This is the equivalent exchange of keeping your right to breathe. I hope this is the last time. If you have similar plans, I advise you to put them away. That's because Mr. 21 will turn this last warning into an absolute fact the moment you have this kind of thought. The goblin spoke in fluent Inferno language, and Keys and Chained could easily understand. He obviously wanted to explain the reason for this conflict through narration rather than justification. After that, he once again exchanged greetings with Keys and the rest, and generously gave them some very unique goblin creations as compensation. That's the best. The misunderstanding has been cleared. Chained, who had waited for the gel to dry and forcibly broke free from the chain cocoon, waved his hand to dismiss some of the barbed demon guards who had gathered around. A bloody battle is imminent. Every bit of strength is precious. If there is such a situation again, then a meal of sashimi as a reward is also a good choice. After saying this joke that he thought was funny, the chain demon gestured as if to emphasize his determination. Chapter 34. The two consecutive conflicts made Keys more aware of the characteristics of this place. The Hell of Bot-Or is indeed a place where compassion withers and resentment flourishes. The blue dragon teenager breathed in the sulphurous air of Avernus, the first layer of Bot-Or. He seemed to feel the anxiety brought by the environment. I must learn to control my emotions and become the master of my emotions, not its servant. After meditating for a while and adjusting his emotions, Keys began to continue his pre-battle preparations. The three ogre brothers were sleeping soundly in another camp. Thanks to the structure of the corpus callosum in his brain, the blue dragon teenager did not need to sleep to prepare spells and do some other things. The battle with the golem just now exposed some problems. In the case of mimicry, Keys still lacked some effective means of attack in his human form. The wailing double-barreled shotgun was an antique weapon after all. It lacked power. At the same time, once 2 rounds of ammunition were fired, it had to be reloaded in time. During the battle with the golem, because he did not have time to reload, he could not use it. This made Keys realize that this weapon had a huge shortcoming in terms of continuous firepower. Apart from the issue of endurance, Keys knew that the enemies he would soon face, the Thanner Re-Demons, were mostly immune to electric and poison damage through his own memories and some pre-battle information issued by the Hell of Bot-Or. As a result, the lightning attack that he could use freely was almost useless. Unless he increased the electric current output and voltage, he could penetrate the demon's resistant skin and cause damage. But this would quickly deplete his stored energy. If he only used the curved sword as a means of attack, even if he relied on the bonus of his constitution, he could only reach the level of some high-level demons. It was absolutely impossible to crush them, and no matter how high-level the demons were, unless they were at the level of a demon lord or above, they were all expendable in the cruel bloody battlefield. They were only slightly better than cannon fodder. As for martial arts, although he had been practicing diligently recently, and at the same time he was better at summarizing patterns and correcting them, Keys was still not confident that he could reach the level of a real master with the same strength and speed. In today's battle with the golem was clearly unarmed and did not use too much strength. Yet, it was still able to easily suppress the combined attacks of him and an ogre warrior. This was enough to prove something. Perhaps we can refer to the design of a Gauss rifle. Keys rubbed the double-barreled shotgun and suddenly had some inspiration. The blue dragon has the talent to control electromagnetic power. This ability used to be a simple spitting attack, using the power of lightning itself to kill. If I can find a way to control the electromagnetic beam, I can use electromagnetic acceleration to launch a metal bullet and convert it into a kinetic attack. Only a few demonic entities or slime monsters are immune to physical attack. Keyes looked at the various metal warheads in front of him and nodded with satisfaction. After a whole night of practice, he figured out how to restrain his electromagnetic ability. After trying to launch an iron nail that he randomly picked up, he knew that his idea was successful. Through electromagnetic acceleration, the iron nail pierced through the uniform armor of hell that was set up nearly 1,000 meters outside the camp. In the process of collision, the iron nail rolled and caused a large hole to appear on the surface of the armor, as if it had been twisted and rubbed by a giant and then pierced through. The requirements of continuous power and high-precision parts that originally limited the range and power of electromagnetic weapons were easily overcome under Keyes's instinctive electromagnetic control. Any metal of any shape could be launched by adjusting the electromagnetic field. However, in order to achieve a good continuous shooting speed, the Blue Dragon asked the craftsmen in the smelting workshop in the camp to create 3 standard warheads. The shuttle-shaped warhead had a high initial speed, suffered the least resistance during flight, and had the longest attack range. Together with Eagle Eye, it could achieve a precise attack on long-range target. The oval-shaped warhead had the largest mass and had a shorter attack range, but the impact was the strongest. It was known as the super electromagnetic gun, and could effectively kill large targets. The grape-like warhead had a grape-like shape. After electromagnetic acceleration, it could form the effect of a short-range shotgun. It could cover an area and kill the surrounding enemy target. There were 1,000 warheads of each type, and Keyes also asked the fire elemental craftsmen in the camp to make the same batch every day. In order to store the ammunition, Keyes also bought a spatial storage belt from the gnome noble. As a reward, Keyes copied a dozen magic scrolls for Riknaz and modified a large number of alchemy bombs for the gnome magician. Keyes completed this work with the help of the ogre magician Blue. He was not the only one who was busy preparing for the bloody battle. A pair of huge crab claws stabbed into the rock wall and brought down a piece of gravel. Another pair of arms stretched out from the front of the chest tightly clung to the edge of the rock and supported the head of a vicious dog with horns. This was a Glabrizu that was more than 18 feet tall and weighed nearly 3 tons. Although the demons in the abyss were different from the devils in Bator, there was no difference between the demons of each race. In fact, experts who were proficient in demonology generally believed that their rank was determined by their strength, and there was no rule to follow. Even the lowest abyssal worms and dretch could grow to become a demon lord. However, the average individual strength of each demon race was definitely different. Similarly, the probability of a Baler becoming a demon lord was definitely much higher than that of a dretch. Although the Glabrizu was not the top demon race, it was definitely one of the best in the abyss. Those traitors, perjurers, and other evil souls who betrayed their country were most likely to become this kind of demon after falling into the abyss. They were used to using their fierce appearance to cover their treacherous nature. Of course, being used to betrayal and liking to conspiracy did not mean that they were smarter than others. In the abyss, there were still a lot of Glabrizu that fell into the trap of other demons. For example, Gurgan. This evil demon that had been born for more than 7,000 years had once entered the Acid Fog Canyon, the 473rd level of the abyss, because it had blindly believed in the fragmented information brought about by some prophecy spells. It carried the sweet dream of eating demon worms every day and entered the 473rd level of the abyss. He thought it was a cafeteria, but when he arrived, he found that it was actually a kitchen. What was even more terrifying was that Gurgan himself had become an ingredient in the kitchen. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of sneaking into other planes. However, the burning skywalkers hovering in the sky, the planar laws modified by the tyrant worm, had caused many demons more powerful than him to succumb to their fate. The nature of demons was ferocious, but they were not fearless of death. If the demons in the material plane were killed, they would be demoted by the will of the abyss, and they would climb out of the blood pool at the bottom of the abyss to become an abyssal worm and continue to evolve. Although this was terrifying, it was not hopeless. However, if they were killed in the abyss, then there was no hope of immunity. Death was death. Gurgen could not forget the scene of a powerful Baylor dying under the siege of an army of burning sky walkers and constantly twisting scourge swarm. It had no choice but to end its life with a self-immolation explosion. He chose to compromise and obediently accepted the parasitism of the acid worms, becoming a candidate for the scourge swarm. Because of this, he was given a chance to live. However, out of nature, the Glabrezu used deceit, and other means to make the intelligent acid worms in his body fight for dominance of his future body. Objectively speaking, his plan was close to success. Originally, with the Glabrezu's physique, it would only take a dozen years for the Glabrezu to be completely occupied by the worms, and the process of erosion into a swarm of worms was greatly prolonged. After 100 years, the worms still could not completely control the creature and evolve into a powerful demon unique to the acid fog canyon. However, these acid worms that used the Glabrezu's body as a battlefield and devoured each other for nearly 100 years finally emerged as the final victor, occupying almost the entire pincer of the Glabrezu. The whole crab pincer emitted a dark, rotten color. Upon closer inspection, one could see the sticky tail of the worm wriggling under the dark green skin. This worm, in the form of a symbiotic body, had become a brand new promotion template for the acid mist worm. We finally escaped from that damned place. The bloody battle was imminent, and Avernus was gradually approaching the abyssal plain that they were about to conquer. Before both sides could mobilize their armies to the gray plains that connected the two plains for a head-on confrontation, both sides had placed many frontline spies through the weak points between the plains. In order to achieve this tactical strike, the tyrant worm even unlocked the dimensional lock that had been suppressing the plane and sent a group of demons to Avernus to secretly investigate the enemy they were about to face. Gurgen had come to Avernus through a newly formed plane passage. Following Gurgen were half a dozen vulture-like Vrak. They flapped their wings and flew out of the pit before the Glabrezu. At this time, they were hiding in a small cave at the edge of the cliff, waiting quietly. They needed to gradually adapt to the slight weakening of the body caused by the ordered tendency of the abyssal plane. Glabrezu, you need to move quickly. The great tyrant worm did not send you here for a vacation. The worm that parasitized Gurgen's pincer had evolved the ability to communicate telepathically. Compared to the ordinary Tana Re, the Order of Abyssal Plane had a stronger weakening effect on a creature that had part of the ancient Obilus demon's genetic information. The Glabrezu could feel a deep sense of powerlessness in its pincer, which only had a faint feeling of being parasitized. The parasitic worm's breathing holes were violently opening and closing, as if it wanted to quickly adapt to the air environment here. Indeed, we need to move quickly. The Glabrezu, who had just climbed up the cliff, raised its pincer and chopped down on its pincer, which had become gray and shriveled due to the parasitism. At the base of the other pincer, half of its pincer was chopped off. As if it was not its own body, the huge pincer clamped on the pincer that had not been chopped off and pulled hard. With the help of the arm-like appendages on its chest, the parasitized pincer completely fell off. Blood and bone fragments were scattered all over the ground. Perhaps it was because of the parasitism of the acid mist worm's flesh. Emerald green blood flowed out of the pincer's severed pincer, and the black blood that was common to Tana Re demons dripped from the severed pincer's body. Gurgen, how dare you! The acid mist worm that had parasitized the pincer of the Glabrezu did not die. It kept cursing and threatening Gurgen. However, the Glabrezu responded to the telepathic message of the parasite that was originally its amulet with a hammer of chaos. No 2, 3 until the pincer's pincer and Lyman's acid mist worm were smashed into minced meat. The Glabrezu, whose body was still dripping with blood, let out a joyful howl. The The 6 Vroks that were hiding around were all attracted by the sound. When they gathered around and saw Gurgen's severed pincer and the small pit with emerald green liquid in front of it, they all understood the reason. Not doing anything? Or do you want to fight me? The Glabrezu opened its mouth that looked like a vicious dog's and revealed a sneer. A few Vroks looked at each other as if they had received some inspiration. They used their sharp beaks and claws to pull out parasitic acid mist worms from each other's feather-covered bodies. Some were casually thrown to the ground and trampled to death. Some were thrown into their mouths and chewed. From time to time, 1 or 2 of them would curse in the abyssal language because their companions had scratched them. The same thing kept happening as more and more demons climbed out of the pit. By the time the crack in the plain disappeared, thousands of demons had gathered at the edge of the pit. The Glabrezu used its strength to command these demons that were sent to Avernus to do reconnaissance work. The occasional demons that disobeyed its orders were all turned into its own nutrient. With these nutrients from the abyss, the Glabrezu's severed pincer on the left had grown back, but it was slightly smaller than the right one. Wiping the flesh and blood that flowed out of its mouth, Gurgen, who had eaten a full meal of Tana Re flesh, looked at the demons gathered around him. It was only then that he remembered what he should do now. As demons, the Tana Re's nature of resisting order would make every creature who tried to manage them collapse. Even the demon lord could only instruct them to do some simple things. However, as compensation, the demons of the abyss far exceeded their eternal enemy, the Batsu devil, who lived in Bador. Demon commanders often had dozens of times more soldiers to consume than demon commanders, so they had a higher margin of error. Even as a scouting team, the Glabrezu had thousands of Tana Re to consume, and there were no less than tens of thousands of teams with the same mission. So for the demons, the so-called scouting of the enemy was very simple. Gurgen did not think that he could be stronger than the demon lord, so he just pointed in a direction and roared in the abyssal language, "Attack in this direction, find those hypocritical demons hiding, and kill them all." Simple and effective orders, easy to understand and easier to execute. As long as all the demons were dead, Gurgen's mission would be completed. As a Glabrezu, he could use a greater teleportation spell to escape at any time. As for whether he would return to report, it depended on the plan at the time. It had to be said that this was very demonic. Chapter 35. The heroes of the Broom-Brows gang were in for a bad time. Under the suggestion of an unscrupulous battle strategist, the thugs were assigned to repair the defensive fortifications of the mercenary camp so that they wouldn't waste their energy. With the strict supervision of the barbed demon guards and ample supplies, the watchtowers, ridged walls, shooting parapets, and trenches were repaired in just a few thousand working hours. However, the price they had to pay was that the thugs, who were always in high spirits, turned into shrimps after work every day. Fortunately, Bador never mistreated the mercenaries from other planes when it came to food. Most of the demons in the lower planes didn't need to eat, and the thousands of planes that were responsible for providing supplies for the bloody war that was about to break out in Avernus were more than enough to provide all kinds of food for the mercenaries on the material planes. The livestock, slaves, soldiers, and even demons that died of illness, exhaustion, murder, or even punishment would not go to waste. Their flesh and blood would be minced and compressed into large luncheon meat cans, which would then be sterilized at high temperatures to ensure that no one would die from eating them. Finally, the cans would be shipped to the mercenary camps in other planes as protein-rich food supplement. Gourmet Brew was originally very interested in this technology, but when he wanted to learn it, he was told that he had to pay a high patent fee to the logistics department of Bador, and when he secretly cooked it for Keys and his brothers to taste, he finally gave up on the idea of learning this dark cuisine. Of course, Dalton and his brothers didn't know the raw materials and manufacturing methods of the canned food. They were only amazed at the richness of Bador that allowed them to eat meat for every meal, and lamented the fact that the food was a little greasy. It would be perfect if they had beer with rich bubbles like the ones in Soft Maple City. But the canned food was really satisfying. Just like that, Broom Eyebrow's thugs were able to complete the basic fortifications with canned meat for every meal. But it was obvious that the demons wouldn't give them a few days to rest. The iconic building of Avernus, the Bronze Citadel, was already at the 13th floor and was still being expanded. Therefore, these unlucky fellows were arranged to continue widening the moat outside the already repaired city wall and build another outer city wall. The only thing that made them happy was the fact that new mercenaries from other planes had been sent into the camp over the past few days. Many of them had committed crimes and were sent to the construction site to be reformed through labor. The Broom Brows gang had found another target to bully. "You wretch, you only know how to slack off. Don't tell me you want to eat a whip?" The boss was the boss. Even in this devil's big construction site, Dalton quickly mixed into the privileged class. To be honest, the average barbed fiend guard was no match for this barbarian fighter in terms of strength. In Bateau, strength was the guarantee of status, and status was the symbol of strength. Dalton had the strength comparable to the barbed demon guards. Naturally, he was silently regarded as a supervisor instead of a laborer. Dalton was especially happy today. It could be said that today was the happiest day since he came to Bator. It was because a group of old acquaintances, the leaders of the Mad Dog Gang, who had opposed him in Soft Maple City, were also sent to this godforsaken place. And it seemed that they were even more miserable than him. They only brought a few subordinates, and could only work under the supervision of his whip. F***ck, that's what I said. I'm not the only one who did so many wicked things. Why should I go to hell alone? Dalton thought happily. The whip in his hand was not idle. From time to time, he would find Doug, who was known as Mad Dog. The quality of the leather whips produced in Bator Hell was absolutely guaranteed. When it hit a person, it would make a crisp sound like breaking a tree branch. The person being whipped would also experience the Niebuhr's gentle reminder attached to the whip, which would bring sharp and unbearable pain to the victim. If Doug, the Mad Dog, had not been so tough that he was immune to some of the effects of the whip, he would have been twitching on the ground like a dead dog. "Damn you, son of a bitch! I curse you to take root in this place that suits you, until you grow mold and maggots." Mad Dog smashed his pickaxe into the soft red soil of Avernus. He imagined that the rock on the ground was Broom Brows Dalton's skull, and that he would smash it into pieces. "Ho ho ho, mortal, do you need some help?" A voice suddenly sounded in Doug's ears. If it were not for the crunching sound that sounded like crabs, the voice would have sounded kind and honest, just like the stubborn new judge in Soft Maple City. "Who are you?" Doug looked around and asked warily in a low voice. He did not see who was talking to him. He realized that the voice was probably a telepathic ability, just like the evil demon who tricked him into coming to this godforsaken place. "Who am I? That's not important. I'm just a passerby who can't stand the oppression and exploitation here." "Don't you want more power to break the shackles on your neck?" the voice said patiently. Doug rudely interrupted the voice. "Listen, I won't fall for your evil tricks again. Although I want power, it's fine as long as you admit that you want power," the person who asked the question interrupted Doug. As the voice sounded, a light that looked like a curtain of water flashed. The Glabrezu, who was still invisible around Doug, cast its monthly spell-like ability, Limited Wish. It could only be cast with the consent of the target, and the target could only be a mortal. The Glabrezu was a master of deceit and lies. It was used to using this spell-like ability to satisfy the wishes of mortals who succumbed to its lies or trick. However, most of the wishes would be distorted by the Glabrezu. Some people wished that they could be rich, but in the end, they might find that they were indeed rich after being teleported to an uninhabited island. Some people wished that they could be loved, but in the end, they found that the one who fell in love with them might be an alien creature from nowhere. And so on. The Glabrezu would not really help a mortal to fulfill their wishes. They were not afraid to distort the wishes of the petitioners with the greatest malice, provided that the mortals agreed to accept their help. Ho ho ho! The Glabrezu looked at the werewolf Doug, whose snout protruded, his legs turned into an anti-joint structure, and his hands turned into sharp claws. The Glabrezu laughed with satisfaction. Go and tear him apart. Go and take revenge. Go and vent your dissatisfaction with this place. Puppy. The mad dog had turned into a vicious wolf. As soon as Doug transformed into a werewolf, he turned into a black shadow and pounced on his favorite prey, Broom Eyebrows Dalton. The elite barbarian warrior was as surprised as the others at Doug's sudden transformation, but it did not affect his counterattack. Before the vicious wolf pounced on him, Dalton threw away the whip in his hand and put on his beloved steel boxing glove. He twisted his waist, sucked in his stomach, and leaned slightly to the side to avoid the werewolf's pounce. Then, he used the spiked boxing gloves to greet his old friend, who had turned into a monster. The werewolf's sharp claws only left some scratches on Dalton's armor, but Dalton's punch directly smashed the right side of his face. Puppy, come to daddy. Ha! Dalton ignored Broom Eyebrows' provocation. It was also possible that Doug had lost the ability to understand language after turning into a werewolf. There were pros and cons. The torn cheek muscles contracted a few times, and the wound was under control. It was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Dalton's eyes darkened when he saw the change in Mad Dog. An opponent who could regenerate was the greatest challenge for a warrior. He stopped taunting the enemy and prepared to take the initiative to attack. He wanted to finish off this potential threat as soon as possible. However, as he changed his tactics, Mad Dog also changed his habit of risking his life to attack. As soon as Dalton launched his attack, the werewolf turned and fled, waiting for an opportunity to attack some of his minions. Taking their lives did not even slow him down. Damn it! What's wrong with Mad Dog? It was still a bit difficult to chase after the werewolf with two legs. Dalton's attacks could never hit the werewolf. In the short span of a dozen breaths, 5 to 6 laborers on the construction site had their necks slit by the sharp claws of the werewolves. Moreover, every time the werewolves killed a person, a streak of blood would appear on their claws. After taking a dozen lives, the blood at the tip of his claws seemed to have solidified. Suddenly, he howled, and the blood-red light flowed into his body through the wolf's mouth. All his muscles and bones instantly swelled, and his werewolf body changed again. 2 arms with sharp claws broke through the skin between his ribs. After completing his new evolution, Werewolf Doug no longer fled. He turned around and attacked Dalton again. The barbed fiend guards in the area quickly learned of the situation, and they all hurried over. Keys and the others were even faster than them. They were meditating in the camp. When the Glabrezu cast Limited Wish, the Blue Dragon Boy, who had a keen sense for magical fluctuations, noticed something. Chapter 36. Enemy Attack. After identifying the type of magic wave in the air, Keys quickly realized that someone had cast a limited prayer spell. This was the specialty of the Glabrezu. After receiving Keys's warning, all the high-level combatants in the camp, including the chain demons, understood that a battle was about to break out. From top to bottom, the war machine of Bator began to operate. Armor and weapons were quickly distributed to every soldier. There was no need to mobilize for war. Demon officers of all levels led their soldiers to an appropriate position in an orderly manner. There was only the clamor of the mercenaries in the camp, but it was quickly suppressed by the supervision team led by Chained Demon himself. In the Hell of Batsu, they had to abide by the rules. There was no need to shout and cheer. The Batsu devils only believed that order and discipline were the guarantee of victory. Mr. Keys, the camp's bastion, is suspected to have encountered a disturbance caused by the demons. Since you're the first person to discover this problem, I need you to lead a small group to find the Glabrizu that's causing the destruction and the source of the disturbance. Before the demons launch a large-scale attack, we need to send enough soldiers to defend the perimeter. Keyes had no objections to the arrangement of the chain demons acting as commander. Standing at the edge of the newly built battlements, he immediately saw the berserk werewolf causing chaos. He took an unloaded treadmill crossbow from the barbed demon soldier beside him, drew it with his hand, aimed, and fired. His movements were smooth and fluid. The crossbow bolts made from the spikes of the spike demons cut through the air without making the slightest sound. The 3 bolts installed in the crossbow flew out in succession, covering the werewolf's possible movements in a triangular formation. 2 crossbow bolts missed, but the third one, which was about to miss, seemed to have hit something. Ah! With an angry roar, the Glabrizu's figure appeared from the effect of the veil of concealment. The spikes of the spiked demons had the effect of penetrating armor. The thick scales were pierced through without any resistance. Fortunately, the thick muscles tightly clamped the arrow, preventing it from entering. The infernal power on the tip of the arrow made the Glabrizu, who was not used to Avernus's laws, feel even more pain. Well done! The Batsu around him all cheered for Keyes. But only he knew that in order to look cool, not only did he cast hold on the werewolf, he even added the effect of guidance on the crossbow bolts he shot out. But in the end, with a guilty conscience, the Blue Dragon Boy threw the crossbow to its original user. He pulled out his sword and jumped down from the city wall. As expected, he was destined to be a melee fighter. Following closely behind was the ogre Neru. The ogre had been crafting many good things for himself in the blacksmith shop for the past few days. When he landed on the ground outside the bastion, a few laborers who were about to escape back to the city were immediately knocked down. Number 21, you don't have to worry about me. You can go down and relax. The goblin Renaz, who was also standing on the battlements, looked at his mechanical puppet friend who was eager to fight after discovering the enemy, and said in a friendly tone, I have enough half-golem guards here. Just be careful not to accidentally hurt your allies. Mechanical puppet number 21 seemed to be happy when it heard that. The red light in its eye sockets flickered for a moment, and it let out an electronically synthesized voice. Roger that. Decepticons, attack. Keyes, who heard the voice, could not help but turn around to look at the mechanical puppet in surprise. Doug, who had turned into a werewolf, pounced on the Blue Dragon Boy when it noticed that the enemy was distracted. It used its sharp claws to tear the boy's throat. Then there was no then. Keyes, who was a little annoyed by the sneak attack, used his fist to punch the werewolf's soft abdomen. It was as if he was hit by a megalosaurus. This was also the truth. The werewolf's eyes burst due to the sudden increase in blood pressure, and its spine was directly broken into several pieces. It was like a rag doll that had been trampled on, and it flew back faster than it pounced on Kieran. Keyes leaned forward and slashed with his sword. The werewolf's head was separated from its body in midair. You think you can disobey the law just because you're a minor? Seriously. The mechanical puppet uttered a series of words that were incomprehensible. It overtook Neru, who had adjusted his posture and was ready to charge. It swept past Quess and ran directly towards the only remaining opponent in its sight. Glabrizu Gurgen had already pulled out the crossbow arrow embedded in its body. It did not care how much blood and minced meat it had brought out in such a crude way. The first thing it did was to insert the arrow that brought it pain into the body of the nearest creature. The eye socket of an unlucky Broom Eyebrows gang member became the final destination of the crossbow arrow. Ha! The Glabrizu, who had done this, laughed. Inflicting pain on the innocent was the best medicine for it. The stinging pain caused by the accumulated purgatory power in the wound did not seem so unbearable. Gurgen moved its injured appendages and commissary, and then fought with the mechanical puppet warrior who had already rushed over. Soon, he could not laugh anymore. In just an instant, even if the mechanical warrior was still empty-handed, sweeping, chopping, pushing, cutting, sweeping, blocking, slashing, piercing, all kinds of techniques made the Glabrezu only have the ability to block and not have the ability to fight back. Gurgen was sure that the guy in front of him must have a high monk profession level, but he did not know if he could still use advanced professional skills such as shock punch, combat aura strike, and infiltration. Of course, the Glabrezu had no intention of continuing to experience it himself. He was not a Hezru who completely relied on his physical strength to fight. He had so many innate spells that he did not use. Did he want to learn from the kind paladins and pay attention to fairness in battle? In the gap between the mechanical puppet's punches, Gurgen activated mirror image. 10 Glabrezu appeared around the mechanical puppet at the same time, and they surrounded it. All the mirror images moved in the same way, and even the expressions on their faces were the same. Be careful of the hammer of chaos. Of course, this was not a warning from the Glabrezu. Keys saw that the Glabrezu had already used spell-like abilities, and it was easy to guess his battle plan: to use mirror image to distract the mechanical puppet warrior, and then use the hammer of chaos to launch a sneak attack. This was a common tactic used by the Glabrezu. Before Keys could finish his warning, the Glabrezu surrounding mechanical puppet number 21 opened and closed their commissary at the same time, making a uniform clicking sound. Dozens of hammer of chaos were all focused on the place where the mechanical puppet stood. It was like a series of high-explosive grenades exploding on the spot. In an instant, the dust raised completely annihilated the mechanical puppet. Ha 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 ha! After doing this, the Glabrezu laughed heartily. Because of excitement, his commissary kept making a snapping sound as they opened and closed each other. A smashed mechanical puppet. Before he could finish his proud words, a heavy punch landed on his face. It was as if he had been hit by a heavy cannon. The bewitching demon fell from the sky. His entire face and half of his teeth were smashed together. Mechanical puppet number 21, who leaped out of the smoke and dust caused by the hammer of chaos, had a body made of adamantine and mithril that was slightly damaged. However, where the magic power tore, the remaining metals bit into each other, and the senseless gears nested in turn. These damages were repaired at a speed visible to the naked eye. You're not the purple potato spirit. What's the use of snapping your fingers? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.